In the shadowy halls of Blackwood Manor, a cryptic letter summons Hercule Poirot to unravel a deadly family secret. When Lady Eleanor Blackwood is found stabbed in her locked study, a missing ruby brooch and a torn note reading "Trust Spark." A web of lies, as greed, betrayal, and hidden scandals surface among the suspects: her debt-ridden son, secretive brother, and charming Gaspereau's little grey cells race to uncover a shocking twist. The killer's identity hinges on a hidden heir, revealed in a heart-pounding finale that ties every clue together. Will Poirot solve the case before another strike? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackwood Manor. The autumn wind carried a sharp chill as it swept across the rolling hills of the English countryside, rustling the golden leaves that clung stubbornly to the ancient oaks. Hercule Poirot, his small frame bundled in a meticulously tailored overcoat, stood at the edge of a gravel path, his polished shoes gleaming despite the dust of travel. His moustache, as always, was a work of art, waxed to perfection, its tips curling with a precision that mirrored the orderly workings of his mind. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, adjusted his scarf and squinted at the horizon, where the silhouette of Blackwood Manor loomed against the fading light. "Poirot, are you quite certain about this?" Hastings asked, his voice tinged with the unease that often accompanied their ventures into the unknown. "This invitation from Lady Blackwood, it's all rather vague, don't you think? A family secret, a request for your presence, and not a word more. It smells of trouble." Poirot's green eyes twinkled with amusement, though his expression remained composed. "Mon ami, trouble is the very air I breathe. When a lady of such standing as Eleanor Blackwood writes to Hercule Poirot with urgency, it is not for a trifling matter. No, no, there is something of great import at Blackwood Manor, and it is our duty, our privilege to uncover it." Hastings sighed, his broad shoulders slumping slightly. He had long since learned that arguing with Poirot was as futile as convincing a cat to fetch. The little Belgian detective's little grey cells, as he so fondly called them, were already at work, piecing together a puzzle that had yet to fully reveal itself. The letter, delivered to Poirot's London flat 3 days prior, had been brief but compelling. Written in an elegant hand on heavy cream paper, it bore the Blackwood family crest, a raven clutching a rose. Lady Eleanor Blackwood, widow of the late Sir Reginald Blackwood, had requested Poirot's immediate presence at her ancestral home in Hertfordshire. She spoke of a matter of grave concern threatening her family's legacy, but offered no specifics, only an assurance that Poirot's unique talents were required. The letter ended with a plea. "Time is of the essence, Monsieur Poirot. I trust in your discretion." Poirot had been intrigued, not least because the Blackwood name carried weight. The family, though no longer at the zenith of its influence, was steeped in history, its wealth built on land and trade centuries ago. Lady Eleanor, now in her late 60s, was known for her sharp intellect and iron will, qualities that had preserved the family's standing through scandals and financial strain. For such a woman to seek Poirot's aid suggested a crisis of extraordinary proportions. The journey from London had been uneventful, save for Hastings grumbling about the early hour and the discomfort of the train. Now, as they approached the manor, the grandeur of Blackwood Manor unfolded before them. The house was a sprawling edifice of grey stone, its towers and gables rising like the bones of some ancient beast. Ivy clung to its walls, softening the severity of its architecture, while tall windows reflected the last rays of the setting sun. A gravel drive curved toward the entrance, flanked by manicured hedges and statues weathered by time. Impressive, isn't it? Hastings remarked, his unease momentarily forgotten. Though it's got a touch of the Gothic about it. Wouldn't be surprised if there's a ghost or two lurking inside. Poirot chuckled softly. Ghosts, Hastings. Nan, I think we shall find our spectres to be of the living variety, with motives far more tangible than the supernatural. Come, let us meet our hostess and discover what secrets this grand house holds. A liveried footman greeted them at the entrance, taking their coats and hats with practiced efficiency. The interior of Blackwood Manor was as imposing as its exterior, with a vast entrance hall dominated by a sweeping staircase of polished oak. Portraits of stern-faced Blackwoods lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow the visitors as they were led toward the drawing-room. The air smelled of beeswax and old wood, mingled with the faint sweetness of roses from a nearby vase. Lady Eleanor Blackwood awaited them in the drawing-room, seated in a high-backed chair beside a roaring fire. She was a striking figure, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her posture regal despite the lines etched into her face. Her eyes, a piercing blue, assessed Poirot and Hastings with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She wore a deep burgundy gown, its simplicity offset by a single ruby brooch pinned at her breast, a family heirloom. Poirot noted, its craftsmanship exquisite. Monsieur Poirot, she said, rising to greet them, her voice clear and commanding. I am most grateful for your prompt response. And Captain Hastings, a pleasure to meet you. Please, be seated. Poirot inclined his head, his manners impeccable. Madame, it is an honor to be summoned by one of your distinction. Your letter spoke of a matter most urgent. I am at your service. Lady Eleanor gestured to a pair of armchairs opposite her, and the two men sat. A maid entered, setting down a tray of tea and biscuits, but Eleanor waved her away with a flick of her hand. The door closed, leaving the three alone. For a moment, silence hung in the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire. I trust you are a man of discretion, Monsieur Poirot, Eleanor began, her gaze steady. What I am about to tell you must remain within these walls, at least until we have resolved the matter. Poirot nodded. You have my word, madame. Hercule Poirot does not betray a confidence. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. The Blackwood family is in peril not from without, but from within. There is a secret, one that has been buried for years, that now threatens to destroy us. I cannot say more until I am certain of your involvement, but know this, I fear for my life and for the future of my family. I need your intellect, your ability to see what others cannot. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Lady Blackwood, if you're in danger, why not go to the police? Surely they could. The police, Eleanor interrupted, her tone sharp, would only muddy the waters. This is a matter of subtlety, Captain Hastings, not brute force. Monsieur, Poirot's reputation precedes him. If anyone can unravel this tangle, it is he. Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin, a familiar gesture that signalled his mind was already at work. You speak of a secret, madame, yet you withhold its nature. I understand your caution, but to assist you, I must have facts. Who resides in this house? Who might have cause to threaten you? Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Very well. My household is small, but complicated. My son, Henry, lives here with his wife, Clara, and their daughter, Beatrice. Henry is a good man, but easily swayed by his ambitions. Clara is devoted to him, perhaps too much so. Beatrice, my granddaughter, is spirited, but she chafes under the expectations of this family. Then there is my brother, Vincent, who returned from abroad some years ago. He is private, and we have not always seen eye to eye. Finally, there is a guest, Dr. Julian Marsh, a friend of the family. He is charming, but I have my doubts about his intentions. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, and the staff, they, too, are part of the household's tapestry. Eleanor waved a hand dismissively. The usual complement: butler, maids, cook, gardener. They are loyal, or so I believe. Mr. Grayson, the butler, has been with us for decades. If there is disloyalty, it lies elsewhere. Poirot nodded, committing each name to memory. You suspect one of these individuals, madame? Or perhaps more than one? I suspect everyone, Eleanor said bluntly. But I have no proof, only a sense of unease that grows with each passing day. I had hoped to discuss this further with you tonight, but I am weary. Tomorrow, after you've settled in, we will speak again. For now, please make yourselves at home. The conversation ended abruptly, and Poirot sensed that Eleanor was holding back, perhaps testing him. The footman returned to show them to their rooms, and as they ascended the grand staircase, Hastings whispered, "What do you make of it, Poirot? She's frightened, but she's not telling us everything." "Precisement, Hastings," Poirot replied, his voice low. "Lady Blackwood is a woman of great control, yet she is shaken. There is a puzzle here, and we have only the first piece. Patience, mon ami, the truth will reveal itself." Their rooms were on the second floor, adjacent but distinct. Poirot's was a study in elegance, with a four-poster bed, heavy velvet, curtains, and a writing desk that pleased his sense of order. Hastings' room, across the hall, was simpler but comfortable. After unpacking, they reconvened in Poirot's room, where a small fire burned in the grate. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, settling into a chair, "what's our next move? Do we start questioning the family tomorrow?" Poirot shook his head. "Nan, Hastings, tomorrow we observe. The family will reveal themselves through their actions, their words, their glances. We must be like the spider, spinning a web to catch the truth. For now, let us dine and meet these players in our little drama." Dinner was announced at 8, and the dining room was a spectacle of opulence. A long mahogany table, set with silver and crystal, gleamed under the light of a chandelier. Lady Eleanor presided at the head, her presence commanding despite her earlier vulnerability. To her right sat Sir Henry Blackwood, a man in his late 40s, with thinning hair and a nervous smile. His wife, Clara, was a delicate woman with sharp features and eyes that darted about the room. Beatrice, their daughter, was a striking young woman of 20, her dark hair pinned loosely, her expression one of barely concealed defiance. Vincent, Eleanor's brother, was a lean man with a weathered face, his silence almost palpable. Dr. Julian Marsh, the guest, was the antithesis, charming, articulate, with a smile that seemed to disarm everyone but Poirot. The meal was pheasant, glazed vegetables, and a velouté sauce that Poirot approved of with a nod, but the atmosphere was strained. Conversation was stilted, punctuated by awkward silences. Henry spoke of estate matters, his voice overly cheerful. Clara mentioned a charity event, her words clipped. Beatrice made a barbed comment about family obligations, earning a sharp look from her mother. Vincent said little, his eyes fixed on his plate, while Dr. Marsh regaled the table with a story of his travels. his charm filling the gaps in the conversation. Poirot watched it all, his mind cataloguing every detail. The way Clara's hand trembled when she reached for her glass, the fleeting glance between Beatrice and Marsh, the way Vincent's fork paused when Eleanor mentioned the family trust. Hastings, less subtle, tried to steer the conversation toward Eleanor's concerns, but she deftly changed the subject. As dessert was served a delicate lemon, soufflé tension seemed to ease. But Poirot's instincts told him the calm was deceptive. He was about to ask a carefully worded question when a scream shattered the silence. Coming from the direction of the study, the table froze, then erupted into chaos. Eleanor rose, her face pale. "That was from my study," she exclaimed, hurrying toward the door, the others following. Poirot and Hastings were close behind, their senses heightened. The study was on the ground floor, a heavy oak door leading to a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk. The door was locked, and Eleanor fumbled with a key from her pocket. When it swung open, the sight within stopped them all. Lady Eleanor Blackwood lay slumped over her desk, a letter opener protruding from her chest. Blood pooled on the blotter, staining the papers beneath her. The ruby brooch was gone from her gown, and a single sheet of paper, torn and smudged with ink, lay beside her hand. The word trust was scrawled upon it, the ink still wet. The window was ajar, letting in a cold draught, but it was too small for anyone to have entered or escaped. The room was otherwise undisturbed, the lock intact, the key still in Eleanor's possession. "She's dead," Dr. Marsh said, stepping forward to check her pulse, his voice steady but grim. "Stabbed through the heart," Clara gasped, clutching Henry's arm. Beatrice stood frozen, her eyes wide. Vincent's face was unreadable, his hands clenched at his sides. Hastings, ever practical, moved to the window, peering out into the darkness, but found no signs of an intruder. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. He noted the angle of the letter opener, the position of the ink bottle spilled, but not entirely so, and the torn paper. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the heavy curtains, the locked safe in the corner, the faint scent of perfume that lingered in the air. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "This is no accident, nor a crime of passion. This is a murder most calculated." The household stood in stunned silence, their faces a gallery of shock, fear, and Poirot noted perhaps guilt. The puzzle had begun, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, was determined to solve it. The night grew late, but sleep was far from Poirot's mind. After the police were summoned, a local constable, who seemed overwhelmed by the grandeur of Blackwood Manor. Poirot insisted on preserving the scene until a proper inspector could arrive in the morning. The household retired, though none seemed eager to be alone. Poirot and Hastings remained in the drawing-room, the fire now reduced to embers. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, "this is a fine mess. Lady Blackwood dead, and in a locked room, no less. How do you suppose the killer got in and out?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "The locked room, Hastings, is but a trick of the mind. The answer lies not in the door or the window, but in the why. Why was Madame Blackwood killed? Why now, and why with such theatrics? The torn paper, the missing brooch, the spilled ink, these are not accidents. They are clues left for us to find." Hastings frowned. Clues or distractions? That word, trust, do you think it's a message? "Perhaps," Poirot said, his fingers tapping lightly on the arm of his chair. Or perhaps it is a misdirection. We must consider all possibilities. The family, the guest, even the staffage has a part to play. Tomorrow we begin in earnest. For now, rest, mon ami. The little grey cells require clarity, and clarity comes with sleep. Hastings nodded, though his expression suggested he doubted sleep would come easily. As they parted for the night, Poirot lingered by the drawing-room window, gazing out at the darkened estate. Blackwood Manor held its secrets tightly, but Hercule Poirot was no stranger to unravelling the most stubborn of mysteries. The game was afoot, and he would not rest until the truth was laid bare. Chapter 2. The Locked Room Puzzle. The morning sun cast a pale, watery light through the tall windows of Blackwood Manor, doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the household. Lady Eleanor Blackwood's death had struck like a thunderbolt, and the air was thick with shock, suspicion, and unspoken fears. Hercule Poirot, his small frame impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, stood in the centre of the late matriarch's study, his sharp eyes scanning every detail of the room. Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend and occasional confidant, hovered near the doorway, his face a mixture of curiosity and unease. The study was a grand oak-panelled space, lined with towering bookshelves and dominated by a heavy mahogany desk. The room smelled faintly of old leather ink and the metallic temps of blood. Lady Eleanor's body had been removed by the local coroner, but the scene remained untouched at Poirot's insistence. The letter opener, its silver handle smeared with blood, lay on the desk where it had been found, glinting faintly in the morning light. The spilled ink bottle, its contents pooling across a stack of papers, added a chaotic note to the otherwise orderly room. A single sheet of torn paper, bearing the word trust in Eleanor's elegant script, lay crumpled near the edge of the desk. The ruby brooch, a family heirloom of considerable value, was conspicuously absent, though its velvet case sat open on a side table. Poirot's gaze lingered on the locked door, its heavy brass key still in place on the inside. The room had been sealed from within, a fact confirmed by the butler, Mr. Grayson, who had broken the door down after hearing Clara Blackwood's screams. The single window set high in the wall was ajar, but its narrow frame and the sheer drop to the gravel courtyard below made it an unlikely point of entry or exit. Hastings, ever practical, paced the room, his brow furrowed. "It's a proper puzzle." "Poirot," he said, pausing to peer at the window. Locked from the inside, no sign of tampering, and yet someone got in and out. Could it have been an outsider? A thief, perhaps, after that brooch? Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of amusement or disapproval. Hastings could never quite tell which. Mon ami, you leap to the romantic notion of the mysterious intruder. But the truth, it is seldom so theatrical. The answer, it lies here, in this room, and in the hearts of those within these walls. We must proceed with method, with order. He stepped toward the desk, his movements precise, almost delicate, as if afraid to disturb the scene's delicate balance. He crouched slightly, examining the ink bottle. "This spill, it is not accidental," he murmured. "The bottle. It is tipped, yes, but the papers beneath, they are arranged too neatly, as if someone wished the ink to obscure something specific." Hastings leaned closer, squinting at the sodden papers. "You think the killer tampered with the desk to hide evidence?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his voice soft but laced with certainty. "Or to create the appearance of a struggle where there was none. The mind of the criminal, Hastings, it is a labyrinth, but always there is a thread to follow." He straightened, his eyes darting to the torn paper. He picked it up with gloved fingers, holding it to the light. Trust, he read aloud. A word of great significance. Nan, trust in whom, or trust betrayed. This paper, it is torn deliberately, but the tear, it is uneven, as if done in haste or anger. Hastings frowned. It could be part of a letter she was writing, or a note to herself. But why tear it? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the window, his small hands clasped behind his back. He studied the frame, the latch, the dust on the sill. This window, it is opened, yes, but the dust, it is undisturbed. No one has climbed through here. It is a distraction, meant to confuse. A distraction, Hastings echoed, his tone skeptical. But why bother? The door was locked, the key inside. Surely that's enough to stump anyone. Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming with that familiar spark of intellectual excitement. Ah, Hastings, you see the locked door and think it an impenetrable barrier. But I, Hercule Poirot, see a challenge. A locked room, it is not a mystery, but a statement. The killer wishes us to believe the impossible, but the impossible, it does not exist. Only the clever disguise of the possible. He began a slow circuit of the room, his polished shoes silent on the Persian rug. He paused by the bookshelves, running a finger along the spines, then stopped at a small painting, a portrait of a stern-faced man in Victorian attire. This painting, it is slightly askew, he noted. A minor detail, but in a room so meticulously kept, it is curious. Nan. Hastings shrugged. Could have been knocked during the struggle. Perhaps, Poirot said, but his tone suggested he thought otherwise. He moved on, his attention now on the velvet case that had once held the ruby brooch. This brooch, it is valuable, yes, but also sentimental. Its absence, it is significant. Was it taken by the killer, or hidden to cast suspicion elsewhere? Before Hastings could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Mr. Grayson, the butler, entered, his face pale and his hands clasped tightly. Monsieur Poirot, the family is gathered in the drawing-room, as you requested. They're anxious, sir, and the police inspector has arrived from the village. Bon, Poirot said, nodding. We shall join them shortly. But first, tell me, Monsieur Grayson, who was the last to see Lady Eleanor alive? Grayson hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the desk. That would be Mrs. Clara Blackwood, sir. She said she spoke with Lady Eleanor in this study around 9 o'clock last night. After that, Lady Eleanor asked not to be disturbed, and you heard nothing unusual. Poirot pressed, his gaze piercing. Nothing, sir, Grayson replied, though his voice wavered slightly. The house was quiet until Mrs. Clara's screams woke us all. Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler with a wave. As Grayson left, Hastings raised an eyebrow. You don't trust him, do you? I trust no one, mon ami, until the truth reveals itself, Poirot said. Come, let us meet the family. Their words, their gestures, they will tell us more than this room, for now. The drawing-room was a stark contrast to the study's sombre atmosphere. It was bright, airy, and filled with the clink of teacups and the murmur of strained conversation. The Blackwood family and their guest sat in a loose circle, their faces a gallery of grief, fear, and suspicion. Sir Henry Blackwood, a broad-shouldered man with a ruddy complexion, sat stiffly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. His wife, Clara, perched beside him, her delicate features drawn tight, her eyes darting nervously. Beatrice, their daughter, lounged defiantly in a corner, her dark hair falling over one shoulder as she toyed with a silver bracelet. Vincent, Lady Eleanor's brother, stood by the fireplace, his gaunt frame and shadowed eyes giving him an air of quiet menace. Dr. Julian Marsh, the charming guest, sat apart, his easy smile at odds with the tension in the room. Inspector Caldwell, a stocky man with a bristling mustache, stood near the door, scribbling in a notebook. He looked up as Poirot and Hastings entered, his expression a mix of deference and skepticism. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume. I've heard of your reputation. I hope you can make sense of this mess." "I shall endeavour to do so," Inspector Poirot said with a slight bow. "But first, I must understand those who shared this house with Lady Eleanor. Their stories, they are the key." He turned to the family, his eyes sweeping over them like a spotlight. "Madame Blackwood," he began, addressing Clara, "you were the last to see Lady Eleanor alive? Oui? Tell me, what was the nature of your conversation?" Clara's hands twisted in her lap, her knuckles white. "It was nothing unusual," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We discussed household matters. She seemed tired, preoccupied. I left her in the study and went to bed." "And you heard nothing after that?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. "Nothing," Clara said, her eyes dropping to the floor. "Not until I found her." Poirot nodded, then turned to Sir Henry. "Monsieur Blackwood, your mother, she was a woman of strong will, Nan. Were there disagreements within the—" Poirot nodded, then turned to Sir Henry. "Monsieur Blackwood, your mother, she was a woman of strong will, Nan. Were there disagreements within the family?" Sir Henry's face reddened. "What are you implying? We all loved mother, of course. We had our differences, who doesn't? But nothing that would lead to this." "Yet the ruby brooch, it is missing," Poirot said smoothly. "A valuable item, and one tied to your family's legacy. Its absence, it suggests a motive, perhaps." Beatrice snorted, drawing all eyes to her. "You think one of us stole it? That's rich. Grandmother probably misplaced it herself. She was always fussing over that thing." "Beatrice," Clara snapped, her voice sharp, "show some respect." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he observed the exchange. "Mademoiselle Beatrice, where were you last night, at the time of your grandmother's death?" "In the garden," Beatrice said, her tone defiant. "I needed air. This house sits suffocating. Alone?" Poirot asked. "Yes," she said, but her eyes flickered. Just for a moment, Poirot turned to Vincent, who had remained silent, his gaze fixed on the fire. "Monsieur Vincent, you are Lady Eleanor's brother, yet you seem apart from the family. What was your relationship with your sister?" Vincent's lips thinned. "We were close once, but time and circumstance, we had our differences. I was in my room last night, reading. I heard nothing." "And you, Dr. Marsh," Poirot said, his attention shifting to the guest. "You are a friend of the family, yet you are not family. Where were you?" Marsh smiled, his charm undimmed by the scrutiny. "In my room, Monsieur Poirot. I retired early, as I had a headache. A dull evening, I'm afraid." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, all of you. I shall have more questions, but for now, I ask that you remain in the manor. The truth, it will not hide for long." As the family dispersed, Inspector Caldwell approached Poirot, his notebook still in hand. "Well, Monsieur Poirot, any theories?" "Too many," Inspector Poirot said with a faint smile. "But they are like threads in a tapestry now, but soon they will form a picture. For now, I must return to the study. There is more it wishes to tell me." Back in the study, Poirot resumed his examination, his movements methodical. He knelt by the desk, peering at the carpet. "Here, Hastings, do you see? A faint mark, as if something heavy was dragged. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to suggest movement." Hastings crouched beside him, squinting. "Could be the killer moving the body," Nan, Poirot said. Lady Eleanor was found seated at her desk, her position undisturbed. "This mark, it is something else, perhaps a chair or a small table, moved to conceal or reveal." He rose, his eyes scanning the room anew. He paused by the fireplace, where a few embers still glowed. This fireplace, it is cold, yet the ashes, they are fresh. Someone burned something recently. Hastings peered into the grate. Papers, maybe. The rest of that torn note. "Perhaps," Poirot said. "But why burn only part?" "The killer. They are clever, but not infallible. They leave clues, even if they do not intend to." He moved to the bookshelves again, his fingers brushing the spines. He stopped at a volume of Shakespeare, slightly protruding. He pulled it out, revealing a small, hidden compartment behind it. Inside was a single key, old and tarnished. "A key," Hastings said, his voice tinged with excitement. "To what that?" "Mon ami, is the question," Poirot said, slipping the key into his pocket. "It may unlock a door, a safe, or a secret, but it is a piece of the puzzle, and we shall keep it close." The day wore on, with Poirot and Hastings moving between the study and the rest of the manor, questioning servants and examining the grounds. The household staff, though shaken, provided little new information. The maid, Mary, confirmed Clara's visit to the study, but added that Lady Eleanor had seemed agitated, muttering about betrayal. The gardener, Tom, reported seeing Beatrice in the garden, but his timeline was vague, leaving her alibi uncertain. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings retreated to the library, where Poirot spread his notes across a table. "We have many pieces, Hastings," he said, his voice low. "The locked room, the torn paper, the missing brooch, the spilled ink, the key. But they do not yet form a whole. The alibis, they are weak, but none are impossible. The motives, they are many: greed, resentment, fear. Yet one clue, it eludes me." Hastings leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "It's a devil of a case, Poirot. Everyone's hiding something, but who's hiding murder?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "That, mon ami, is what we must discover. The killer, they are among us, watching, listening. But they cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. The little grey cells, they are at work, and they will not rest until the truth is revealed." The night deepened, and the manor grew quiet, save for the creak of old wood and the distant howl of the wind. Poirot remained in the library, his mind a whirl of possibilities, each clue a thread in the intricate tapestry of the crime. The locked room, he knew, was not a barrier but a challenge, and he was determined to unravel its secrets, no matter how deeply they were buried. Chapter 3. The family secret, the morning after Lady Eleanor Blackwood's shocking murder. Blackwood Manor seemed to hold its breath. The grand old house, with its ivy-clad walls and towering chimneys, stood silent under a sky heavy with grey clouds, as if mourning its mistress. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with suspicion and grief, each occupant navigating the delicate balance between mourning and self-preservation. Hercule Poirot, ever the observer, sat in the drawing-room, his small, neat figure a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings, his sharp eyes, like polished agates, darted from one face to another, cataloguing every gesture, every fleeting expression. Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend, stood by the tall windows, gazing out at the manicured lawns, though his thoughts were far from the scenery. Poirot Hastings began, turning from the window. This place feels like a powder keg. Everyone's on edge, and I can't shake the feeling that they're all hiding something. Do you think one of them? He trailed off, unwilling to voice the accusation outright. Poirot's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. Mon ami, you are correct to sense the undercurrents. In a house such as this, secrets are as common as the cobwebs in its attics. But fear not, Hercule Poirot is here to sweep them away, one by one, with the precision of a master craftsman. He tapped his temple lightly. The little grey cells, Hastings, they are already at work. The drawing room, with its heavy velvet drapes and polished mahogany furniture, was the gathering place for the Blackwood family and their guests that morning. The air carried the faint scent of beeswax and old books, mingling with the sharper tang of nervous tension. Sir Henry Blackwood, Lady Eleanor's only son, sat slumped in an armchair, his broad shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. His face, ruddy from years of outdoor pursuits, was pale, and his hands fidgeted with a silver cigarette case. Beside him, his wife, Clara, perched on the edge of a settee, her delicate features drawn tight. Her eyes, a striking shade of hazel, flickered nervously toward the door whenever footsteps echoed in the hall. Beatrice, their daughter, leaned against the fireplace, her dark hair falling in rebellious waves over her shoulders. At 22, she had the defiant air of youth, her lips set in a stubborn line as she toyed with a small porcelain figurine. Vincent, Lady Eleanor's younger brother, stood apart, near a bookcase, his lean frame half hidden in the shadows. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers drummed a restless rhythm on the spine of a leather-bound volume. Dr. Julian Marsh, the charming guest whose easy smile had won him favour in the household, sat near Clara, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert, as if gauging the room's mood. Poirot had requested this gathering, ostensibly to discuss the events of the previous night, but in truth he sought to observe. He knew that in the wake of a crime, the guilty often betrayed themselves, not through grand gestures, but in the smallest details, a glance too long, a word misspoken, a hand that trembled. He rose from his chair, his movements deliberate, and clasped his hands behind his back. Madame et messieurs, he began, his voice clear and measured. The tragedy that has befallen this house is one of great sorrow. Lady Eleanor Blackwood, a woman of strength and resolve, has been taken from us in a manner most foul. It is my duty and my calling to uncover the truth, but to do so, I require your cooperation. Each of you holds a piece of the puzzle, whether you know it or not. Sir Henry looked up sharply, his voice gruff. What are you implying, Poirot? That one of us is a murderer? This is my mother we're talking about. His outburst drew a murmur from Clara, who reached out to touch his arm, but he shook her off. Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming yet authoritative. Monsieur Blackwood, I imply nothing. I observe, I question, and I deduce. The facts, they speak for themselves. Lady Eleanor was found in her study, locked from within, with no apparent means of entry or exit. Yet someone entered. Someone struck the fatal blow. That someone, I believe, is among those who knew her best. Beatrice let out a sharp laugh, though there was no humour in it. That's a fine way to start, Mr. Poirot. Accuse the whole lot of us, and see who cracks first. Grandmother was always meddling, always controlling everything. Maybe someone, finally, had enough. Her words hung in the air, and Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Beatrice. Sir Henry snapped, his face reddening. Show some respect. Respect, Beatrice shot back, her eyes flashing. She treated me like a child, always dictating what I could do, who I could see. You're all acting like she was a saint. But she wasn't. She had enemies, even in this house. Vincent stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. That's enough, Beatrice. Your grandmother loved you, even if you didn't see it. Let's not air our grievances in front of strangers. His gaze flicked to Poirot, a silent warning. Poirot, undeterred, tilted his head slightly. Mademoiselle Beatrice, your candor is refreshing. It is precisely this openness that will aid me. Tell me, what did you mean by enemies? Did Lady Eleanor speak of any specific conflicts? Beatrice hesitated, her defiance wavering. I don't know. She was always arguing with someone. With father about money. With Uncle Vincent about, well, whatever they were hiding. And Clara, she glanced at her mother, then looked away. Clara was always tiptoeing around her, like she was afraid of her. Clara's face flushed, and she spoke for the first time, her voice trembling. That's not true. I respected Eleanor. She was formidable, yes, but I cared for her. Beatrice, you know I did. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, though his expression remained polite. Madame Blackwood, your devotion is noted. Yet I sense there is more to this family than meets the eye. Perhaps we might discuss Lady Eleanor's plans for her estate. I understand she was considering changes to her will. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Sir Henry shifted uncomfortably, his cigarette case clicking shut. What are you getting at, Poirot, mothers? Will was her business. She didn't share her plans with me. Nor with me, Vincent added quickly, though his eyes darted to the side, betraying a flicker of unease. Dr. Marsh, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, his voice smooth and conciliatory. Mr. Poirot, I'm merely a guest here. But I can tell you, Lady Eleanor was a woman of strong convictions. If she was altering her will, it was likely to ensure her legacy was protected. She spoke often of her family's future. Poirot turned to Marsh, his gaze piercing. Monsieur le Docteur, your insight is valuable. And where were you, may I ask, when Lady Eleanor met her end? Marsh met Poirot's stare without flinching. In my room, reading. I heard nothing until the commotion began. I'm afraid I have no one to vouch for me, but I assure you I had no reason to harm her. Poirot nodded, though his expression gave nothing away. Very well, let us proceed. Methodically, I will speak with each of you in turn to understand your movements and your relationships with Lady Eleanor. For now, I ask only that you remain in the manor and refrain from discussing this matter amongst yourselves. The truth, it has a way of slipping through careless words. As the group dispersed, Hastings approached Poirot, his brow furrowed. You've stirred the hornet's nest, old chap. Did you see their faces? They're all terrified, guilty. But where do we start? Poirot's eyes gleamed. We start, mon ami, with the heart of the matter, the Blackwood family itself. Each of them carries a secret, and those secrets are the threads that will lead us to the killer. Come, let us begin with Sir Henry. Poirot's first interview took place in the library, a cavernous room lined with shelves that stretched to the ceiling. The air was heavy with the scent of aged paper and leather, and a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Sir Henry stood by a window, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. "Monsieur Blackwood," Poirot began, settling into a high-backed chair, "you are the heir to Blackwood Manor, are you not? A position of great responsibility, and perhaps great burden." Henry turned, his expression guarded. "I suppose so. Mother ran everything, you know. The estate, the finances, she had a grip on it all. I just followed her lead." Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. "And yet I hear whispers of financial difficulties. Debts, perhaps. Such matters can weigh heavily on a man." Henry's jaw tightened. "Who told you that?" "Look, yes, I've had some bad investments. The estate, not what it was. But I didn't need Mother's money, if that's what you're thinking. She'd never have let me starve." Nan, Poirot said soothingly, "I do not accuse. I seek only to understand. Tell me, when did you last speak with your mother?" Henry hesitated, his eyes flickering to the fire. "Yesterday afternoon. She was in her study, going over papers. She seemed distracted. Said she was making changes, important ones. I thought she meant the estate, but now—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "And where were you, monsieur, at the time of her death?" "Between 9 and 10 o'clock last night, in the billiard room with Vincent. We played a few rounds, had a drink. Ask him, he'll tell you." Poirot made a mental note, his expression unreadable. "Merci, Monsieur Blackwood. For now, that is all." As Henry left, Hastings leaned in, whispering, "He's nervous, Poirot. Did you see how he avoided your eyes? And those debts motive enough, don't you think?" Poirot shook his head. "Patience, Hastings. A motive is not a murder. Let us see what Madame Clara has to say." Clara Blackwood entered the library with the grace of a woman accustomed to scrutiny. Her movements measured, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore a simple grey dress, its high collar accentuating her pale complexion. Poirot gestured to a chair, and she sat, her eyes fixed on him with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "Madame," Poirot began, "you are the lady of this house, yet I sense you carry a great weight. Tell me, what was your relationship with Lady Eleanor?" Clara's lips parted, then closed, as if choosing her words with care. She was a formidable woman, strong-willed, always in control. I admired her, but it wasn't easy being her daughter-in-law. She had expectations, and I tried to meet them. "And did you succeed?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. Clara's fingers tightened in her lap. "I hope so. We didn't always agree, but I cared for her. She was Henry's mother and this family. It's everything to me." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And yet your daughter, Beatrice, suggests there was tension, that you were, perhaps, afraid of Lady Eleanor." Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of tears. "Beatrice says things she doesn't mean. She's young, impulsive. I wasn't afraid of Eleanor, but she could be intimidating. She was changing her will, you know. It caused arguments, especially with Henry. Arguments." Poirot's voice was soft, encouraging. Clara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry was upset. He felt entitled to the estate, but Eleanor thought he was reckless with money. She didn't tell me much, but I overheard her talking to Vincent about a new beneficiary. It made things tense. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "A new beneficiary? Did she mention a name?" "No, Clara said quickly. Too quickly. I didn't hear. I was just passing by her study. Poirot studied her for a moment, then nodded. And last night, Madame, where were you when Lady Eleanor was killed? Clara's hands trembled slightly. In my room, resting. I had a headache. I didn't hear anything until Beatrice screamed. Alone. Poirot pressed. Yes, she admitted, her voice faltering. Henry was with Vincent, and Beatrice was. I don't know where. I was alone. Poirot leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Mercy, Madame. You have been most helpful. As Clara rose to leave, Hastings whispered, She's hiding something, Poirot. That pause when you asked about the beneficiary. She knows more than she's letting on. Lips twitched. Indeed, Hastings. But what she hides, and why, that is the question. Let us speak next with Mademoiselle Beatrice. Beatrice Blackwood strode into the library with the air of someone who had little patience for formalities. She dropped into a chair without waiting for an invitation, crossing her arms defiantly. Her dark eyes met Poirot's without flinching, though there was a spark of unease beneath her bravado. Mademoiselle, Poirot began, you have a fire in you, a passion that speaks of a strong spirit. Tell me, what was it that drove such a wedge between you and your grandmother? Beatrice's lips curled into a bitter smile. You don't waste time, do you? Fine. Grandmother thought she could control me, my friends, my future, everything. She wanted me to be a proper lady, marry some dull aristocrat, and carry on the Blackwood name. I wanted to live my own life, and this caused conflict, Poirot asked, his tone neutral. Constantly, Beatrice said, her voice sharp. She threatened to cut me out of her will if I didn't obey. Said I was a disgrace to the family. But I didn't care about her money. I just wanted to be free. Poirot tilted his head, studying her. And yet, you remained here, in her house. Why? Beatrice faltered, her defiance wavering. Because it's my home. And because I thought, maybe, she'd change her mind. She wasn't all bad, you know. Sometimes she'd talk to me about the past, about how she fought to keep this place alive. I respected that. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. A complex woman, your grandmother. Tell me, did you see her yesterday evening? Beatrice shook her head. Not after dinner. She went to her study, like always. I was in the garden, walking. I needed air. Alone? Poirot asked. Yes, she said, then hesitated. Well, I saw Dr. Marsh briefly. He was on the terrace, smoking. But we didn't talk. Poirot made a mental note, his fingers tapping lightly on the arm of his chair. And the arguments you mentioned earlier between your grandmother and others. What did you hear? Beatrice leaned forward, her voice lowering. Grandmother and father fought about money, like always. He's terrible with it, you know. And Uncle Vincent, there was something odd there. I heard them in the study a few days ago, talking about some disgrace from years back. Vincent sounded angry, but grandmother shut him down. I don't know what it was about. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A disgrace, you say? Most interesting. And last night, between 9 and 10, where were you? In the garden, like I said. Beatrice replied, her tone firm. I came in just before 10, when I heard the commotion. Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a polite smile. As she left, Hastings muttered, She's a firebrand, that one. But do you believe her story about the garden? Poirot's expression was enigmatic. For now, I reserve judgment. Let us hear from Monsieur Vincent. Vincent Blackwood entered the library with the cautious air of a man who preferred shadows to spotlight. His lean face was lined with years of secrets, and his eyes, a pale blue, seemed to see through rather than at Poirot. He sat without invitation, his hands resting lightly on his knees. "Monsieur Vincent," Poirot began, "you were the brother of Lady Eleanor, yet you seem to stand apart from this family. Tell me, what was your relationship with your sister?" Vincent's lips twitched, a faint smile that held no warmth. "Eleanor was the strong one, always. She took charge of the family after our parents died, kept this place from falling apart. I followed my own path, but we were close, in our way." "And yet," Poirot said, his voice soft, "there are whispers of a disagreement, a disgrace." "Perhaps." Vincent's hands tightened briefly, the only sign of discomfort. "Beatrice has been talking, hasn't she? That girl hears more than she should." "Yes, Eleanor and I argued, but it was an old matter, long buried. Nothing to do with her death." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Monsieur, I deal in truths, not evasions. What was this disgrace?" Vincent hesitated, then sighed. "It was a scandal, years ago. I made mistakes. Financial ones. Eleanor bailed me out, but it cost her dearly in pride and money. She never let me forget it. That's all I'll say." Poirot nodded, though his expression suggested he was far from satisfied. "And last night, where were you?" "With Henry." "In the billiard room," Vincent said smoothly. "We played until nearly 10, then I went to my room." Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the arm of his chair. "Merci, monsieur. For now, that is all." As Vincent left, Hastings shook his head. "He's slippery, Poirot. That scandal do, you think it's connected?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, perhaps not. But every secret is a thread, Hastings, and we shall follow them all." The final interview was with Dr. Julian Marsh, who entered the library with an air of easy confidence. His handsome face was marred only by a slight tension around the eyes, and he smiled as he took a seat. "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot began, "you are a guest in this house, yet you seem to know its inhabitants well. Tell me, what brought you to Blackwood Manor?" Marsh leaned back, his tone casual. "I met Eleanor a few years ago at a charity event. We struck up a friendship. She invited me to stay, said she valued my company. I'm a doctor, but I also dabble in investments, so we had plenty to talk about." "And your relationship?" "With her?" Poirot asked, his voice neutral. Marsh's smile faltered slightly. "A friendship, nothing more. Eleanor was a remarkable woman, but I wasn't her confidant, if that's what you're asking." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, you were close enough to be here, among her family. Did she speak of her will, or her plans for the estate?" Marsh shook his head. "Not in detail. She mentioned she was reviewing her affairs, but that was all. I got the sense it was causing tension, though. And last night," Poirot pressed, "where were you?" "On the terrace, smoking, until about 9:30. Then I went to my room. I saw Beatrice in the garden, but we didn't speak." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Merci, monsieur. You have been most cooperative." As Marsh left, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. "He's too smooth, Poirot, and no alibi worth a damn. What do you make of him?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "A man of charm, Hastings, but charm can hide many things. For now, we have gathered the pieces. The Blackwood family is a tapestry of motives: greed, resentment, shame, perhaps even love, twisted into something Darker, the little grey cells. They are humming, mon ami. The rest of the day passed in a blur of observation and deduction. Poirot moved through the manor like a shadow, noting the way Clara avoided Vincent's gaze, the way Beatrice watched her father with a mix of pity and frustration, the way Marsh seemed to linger near the family, always watching. He spoke with the staff, learning that the butler, Mr. Grayson, had seen Sir Henry pacing near the study the previous evening, though Henry denied it. The housemaid, Emily, mentioned Clara's frequent headaches, which often kept her in her rumour. Convenient excuse, Poirot noted. By evening, Poirot retired to his room, a small but comfortable space overlooking the gardens. He sat at a writing desk, his notebook open, and began to sketch a mental map of the family's secrets. Sir Henry's debts loomed large, a motive as old as time. Clara's anxiety suggested knowledge she dared not share. Beatrice's rebellion masked a deeper hurt, perhaps a betrayal. Vincent's past held a shadow that refused to fade. And Marsh, the outsider, was too perfectly placed, too conveniently uninvolved. Hastings, Poirot said as his friend entered, "We are in a labyrinth, but the threads are beginning to converge. Tomorrow we dig deeper. The truth, it is close, but it hides behind a veil of lies." Hastings nodded, though his expression was troubled. "I hope you're right, Poirot. This place, it's getting under my skin." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Fear not, mon ami. Hercule Poirot has never failed to lift the veil, and he shall not fail now." As the manor settled into an uneasy silence, Poirot closed his notebook, his mind already racing ahead to the next piece of the puzzle. The Blackwood. Family's secrets were many, but he would unravel them one by one, until the truth stood revealed in all its stark clarity. Chapter 4. The first clue emerges the morning after Lady Eleanor's death. Blackwood Manor seemed to hold its breath. The heavy oak doors creaked under the weight of silence, and the air was thick with suspicion. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his pressed suit and polished shoes, sat in the manor's grand library, his sharp eyes scanning the room. The shelves towered with leather-bound tomes, their spines gilded but dusty, a testament to the Blackwood family's fading glory. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, paced near the fireplace, his brow furrowed with restless energy. "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the stillness, "this place feels like a tomb. How can you sit so calmly when a murderer walks among us?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile curling beneath it. "Mon ami, it is in the calm that the mind finds clarity. The murderer is here, yes, but they cannot hide from the little grey cells. We must observe, we must think, and we must uncover the first clue that will unravel this tangle." Hastings stopped pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. "But where do we start? The locked room, the missing brooch, the blasted word trust on the torn paper writs, all a muddle." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "The muddle, Hastings, is the canvas of the crime. Each detail is a brushstroke, and we must find the one that reveals the artist's intent. Let us begin with the study, where Lady Eleanor met her end." The two men made their way to the late Lady Eleanor's study, a room of dark mahogany and heavy velvet curtains. The air still carried the faint metallic temps of blood, though the body had been removed. The desk, where Eleanor had been found, slumped, was a chaos of papers, an ink bottle overturned, its contents staining the blotter black. The letter opener, the murder weapon, had been taken by the local constable, but Poirot's memory of it was vivid, a silver blade, ornate with the black wood crest engraved on its handle. Poirot knelt beside the desk, his eyes narrowing as he examined the spilled ink. "Curious," he murmured, dipping a gloved finger into the stain. "The ink is dry, yet the bottle was knocked over during the struggle. Why, then, is the spill so contained? It suggests deliberation, not chaos." Hastings peered over his shoulder. Deliberation. "You mean the killer staged the scene?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, rising. "Or perhaps the spill was meant to obscure something. Let us search the desk more thoroughly." They sifted through the papers, finding bills, letters, and a half-finished draft of a charity donation. Nothing seemed immediately incriminating, until Poirot's fingers brushed against the edge of a hidden panel beneath the desk's surface. With a soft click, a small compartment sprang open, revealing a folded letter sealed with wax. The wax bore no crest, only a faint impression of a rose. "Aha!" Poirot exclaimed, his eyes gleaming. "The first clue emerges. Hastings, this letter was hidden for a reason." He broke the seal with care, unfolding the paper to reveal a series of cryptic lines written in Eleanor's precise hand. "To those who seek the truth, beware the one you trust. The fund is not what it seems. Follow the rose to the heart of the betrayal." The words were followed by a string of numbers, 7-14-3-9. Hastings read over Poirot's shoulder, his voice tinged with excitement. "A coded letter. Poirot, this must be what Eleanor was hinting at. In her invitation to you, a family secret, a betrayal due. You think it points to the killer?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "It points, mon ami, but to what we do not yet know." The word trust appears again, as it did on the torn paper. The rose, the numbers, these are pieces of a puzzle, but the fund, that is most intriguing. Lady Eleanor was known for her wealth, much of it tied to a family trust. Perhaps this trust is the key. Hastings frowned. A trust fund. But who controls it? Sir Henry, as her son, would inherit, wouldn't he? "Not necessarily," Poirot said, folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket. Lady Eleanor was rewriting her will, a fact that caused much tension in this household. If she intended to redirect the trust, it would give someone a motive to silence her. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Mr. Grayson, the butler, entered, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I thought you should know there's been a discovery. A footprint near the back entrance. It's muddy, fresh. I've informed the family, and they're in quite a state." Hastings's eyes lit up. "A footprint. Poirot, this could be the break we need. An intruder, perhaps, sneaking in too. Kill Lady Eleanor." Poirot's moustache quivered with disapproval. "An intruder, Hastings. Non, you leap to conclusions like a hare. A footprint is convenient, too convenient. Let us see this evidence before we decide its meaning." They followed Grayson through the manor's labyrinthine halls to the back entrance, a narrow door used by the staff. Outside, in the soft earth near the stone path, was a single, clear footprint. It was large, unmistakably a man's, and the mud was still damp, suggesting it had been made recently. The surrounding ground was undisturbed, with no other prints leading to or from the spot. Hastings crouched, examining the mark. Its deep. Poirot. Whoever made this was heavy or in a hurry. Could it belong to someone in the household? Sir Henry, perhaps, or Dr. Marsh. Poirot studied the footprint. His head tilted. "It is possible, but unlikely. The print is isolated, with no trail. A man does not walk through mud, leave one mark, and then vanish into the air. This is a distraction, Hastings, a red herring meant to divert us from the truth. But why? Hastings asked, standing. If the killer is in the manor, why plant a footprint outside? To suggest an outsider, Poirot replied, his voice low. To make us chase shadows while the real culprit hides in plain sight. No, we will not be misled. The letter, the trust, the rose, these are our focus. They returned to the library, where Poirot spread the coded letter on a table, his fingers tracing the numbers. 71439. A code, he mused. But to what? A safe, a book, a location. We must consider the context. Lady Eleanor was a woman of precision. She would not leave a clue without purpose. Hastings paced again, his mind racing. What about the rose? There's a rose garden behind the manor. Could the clue be hidden there? Poirot's eyes narrowed. The rose garden, an interesting thought, Hastings. But first, let us test. The numbers, they may correspond to something within the manor, perhaps in this very library. They turned their attention to the shelves, scanning for anything that might align with the numbers. The library was vast, its books organized by subject, but not numbered in any obvious way. Poirot's gaze fell on a row of family histories, thick volumes chronicling the Blackwood lineage. He pulled one down, flipping to page 7, then line 14, word 3. The word was legacy. He repeated the process with the next number, 9, but found nothing significant. Nan, Poirot muttered, replacing the book. This is not the way. The numbers are not for books. Perhaps a safe. Then, Lady Eleanor's study had a hidden compartment. Could there be another? They returned to the study, searching every inch of the room. Hastings tapped the walls, listening for hollow spots, while Poirot examined the fireplace, the bookshelves, and the portrait of Eleanor's late husband, Lord Reginald Blackwood. His fingers brushed the frame, and with a faint click, the portrait swung outward, revealing a small wall safe. Hastings, Poirot called, his voice triumphant. We have found it. The safe had a combination lock, for dials waiting for the correct numbers. Poirot entered 71439, and with a soft thud, the door swung open. Inside was a single item, a velvet pouch, containing a silver key, its handle shaped like a rose. The rose, Poirot whispered, holding the key to the light. This is what Lady Eleanor meant, the key to the betrayal. Hastings stared wide-eyed. A key to what? Another safe. A door. Poirot's expression was grave. To the truth, Hastings. This key unlocks more than a locket, unlocks the motive. The trust fund, the betrayal, the murder, all are connected. But we must be cautious. The killer knows we are close, and they will not hesitate to strike again. As they left the study, the manor seemed to close in around them, its shadows deeper, its silence heavier. The family gathered in the drawing room, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. Sir Henry, his jaw tight, demanded answers. Clara, pale and trembling, clutched her husband's arm. Beatrice, defiant, glared at Dr. Marsh, who stood apart, his charm strained. Vincent, Eleanor's brother, sat in silence, his eyes darting to the door. Poirot addressed them, his voice steady. Madame et messieurs, a clue has been found, a clue that brings us closer to the truth. But I urge you to be vigilant. The one who killed Lady Eleanor is among us, and they will not rest until their secret is safe. The room erupted in protests. accusations flying like arrows. Sir Henry pointed at Vincent, Clara whispered to Beatrice, and Dr. Marsh's smile faltered. Poirot watched, his mind cataloguing every reaction, every glance. The first clue had emerged, but the puzzle was far from solved. The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews and observations. Poirot questioned each member of the household, probing for inconsistencies. Sir Henry admitted to his debts, but swore he loved his mother. Clara's anxiety seemed to deepen, her answers vague. Beatrice, fiery and unapologetic, insisted she was in the garden during the murder, though no one could confirm her alibi. Vincent, evasive as ever, claimed he was in his room, reading. Dr. Marsh, smooth and composed, offered little beyond polite denials. Poirot's notebook filled with details, his little grey cells working overtime. The coded letter, the key. The trust fund, they pointed to a deeper conspiracy, one Eleanor had uncovered before her death. But the footprint nagged at him, its placement too deliberate to ignore. Was it a mistake or a calculated move? That evening, as the family dined in strained silence, Poirot sat at the head of the table, his eyes moving from face to face. The clink of silverware was the only sound, each guest lost in their thoughts. Hastings, seated beside him, leaned close. "Poirot," he whispered, "do you think the killer will try again? With Vincent, perhaps, or one of the others?" Poirot's gaze lingered on Clara, who pushed her food around her plate. "The killer is watching, Hastings. They see our progress, and they fear exposure. But fear makes one careless, and carelessness will be their undoing." As the meal ended, Poirot rose, his presence commanding attention. "I have a request," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Tomorrow I wish to see the rose garden. There may be answers there, hidden among the thorns." The family exchanged glances, their unease palpable. Poirot smiled faintly, his moustache curling. The first clue had set the stage, but the next would bring him closer to the heart of the betrayal. For now, he would wait, his mind a web of connections, each thread leading to the truth. Chapter 5. Tensions rise. The dining room at Blackwood Manor was a cavernous space, its high ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork that seemed to loom over the gathered company like a silent judge. The long mahogany table, polished to a mirror-like sheen, was set with fine china and silver candelabras, their flickering flames casting restless shadows on the walls. Yet, despite the opulence, the atmosphere was anything but warm. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, and every clink of cutlery or rustle of fabric seemed to amplify the tension that had been simmering since Lady Eleanor's murder. Hercule Poirot sat at one end of the table, his small, precise hands folded neatly in front of him. His sharp eyes, bright and unyielding, darted from face to face, taking in every nuance of expression. To his right, Captain Hastings fidgeted with his napkin, his discomfort palpable. The Blackwood family and their guest, Dr. Julian Marsh, were seated around the table, their postures rigid, their faces masks of unease. The servants moved silently, serving the first coarser creamy asparagus soup while the weight of the unsolved crime pressed down on them all. Poirot had insisted on this dinner, claiming it was an opportunity to observe the household under pressure. Hastings had been skeptical, muttering about the impropriety of dining so soon after a murder, but Poirot had waved away his concerns. "Mon ami," he had said, "it is in the moments of discomfort that the truth reveals itself. The human heart cannot hide its secrets when the nerves are strained." Now, as the soup was served, Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice cutting through the silence like a finely honed blade. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, his French accent lending an air of formality to the proceedings, "we are gathered here not only to dine, but to reflect. The death of Lady Eleanor is a tragedy, yes, but it is also a puzzle, and I, Hercule Poirot, am determined to solve it. I invite you all to speak freely, to share what you know. For the truth, it is like a shadow, it cannot remain hidden forever." His words hung in the air, met with a chorus of uneasy glances. Sir Henry Blackwood, seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat. His broad shoulders were slumped, and his face, usually ruddy with confidence, was pale. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice strained, "we're all devastated by Mother's death. But surely you don't think one of us—" He stopped, his eyes flickering toward his wife, Clara, who sat beside him. Clara's hand trembled as she lifted her spoon, and a drop of soup spilled onto the pristine tablecloth. She was a delicate woman, with pale blonde hair pinned tightly at the nape of her neck and eyes that seemed perpetually on the verge of tears. "Henry," she murmured, her voice barely audible, "don't. Not now." Beatrice, their daughter, slammed her spoon down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. At 19, she was a striking figure, her dark hair loose and wild, her green eyes blazing with defiance. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mother, stop acting like a frightened mouse. Someone in this room killed Grandmother, and we all know it. Why don't we just say what we're all thinking, Beatrice?" Sir Henry snapped, his face reddening. "That's enough. Show some respect. Respect." Beatrice laughed bitterly, leaning back in her chair. "For whom, Father? For Grandmother, who controlled every penny we spent? Or for you, who's been drowning in debt for years? Or perhaps for Uncle Vincent, who skulks around like he's got something to hide?" Vincent Blackwood, Eleanor's younger brother, looked up from his soup, his thin lips curling into a sneer. He was a wiry man in his late 50s, with a sallow complexion and eyes that seemed to see too much. "Careful, Beatrice," he said softly, his voice laced with menace. "You're throwing stones in a glass house. I heard you arguing with Eleanor just last week. Something about your freedom, wasn't it?" Beatrice's face flushed. But before she could retort, Dr. Julian Marsh intervened. Now, he said, his tone smooth and conciliatory. He was a handsome man, with neatly combed dark hair and a disarming smile that seemed to put others at ease. "Let's not turn this into a battlefield. We're all grieving, and accusations won't bring Lady Eleanor back." He glanced at Poirot, his expression one of studied neutrality. "Perhaps Mr. Poirot can share what he's found so far. That might help us focus." Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging the suggestion. "Mercy, Dr. Marsh. I have indeed made some observations, but they are not yet complete. The study, locked from within, presents a challenge. The clues, the spilled ink, the torn paper, the missing brooch they speak, but their message is not yet clear. What is clear, however, is that Lady Eleanor's death was no accident. Someone in this manner had a motive, and I will uncover it." His words seemed to ignite a spark of panic. Clara's spoon clattered against her bowl, and she pressed a hand to her chest, her breathing shallow. Sir Henry reached for her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Clara, darling, are you all right?" I'm fine," she stammered, but her eyes darted toward Poirot, wide with fear. Hastings, watching closely, leaned toward Poirot and whispered, "She's hiding something, isn't she?" Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Patience, Hastings. The heart reveals itself in time." The meal progressed in uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional murmur or the clink of glassware. The servants cleared the soup and brought the main course, roast lamb with rosemary and garlic butt. The rich aroma did little to lift the mood. Beatrice pushed her plate away, her appetite clearly gone, while Vincent sipped his wine with a calculated slowness, his eyes never leaving Poirot. It was then that Beatrice spoke again, her voice sharp and deliberate. "Mr. Poirot, since you're so keen on the truth, perhaps you should know something. The night before grandmother died, I overheard her arguing with Uncle Vincent. It was in the library, late. She was furious, talking about some disgrace in his past. She said he'd brought shame on the family and that she'd never forgive him." Vincent's glass froze halfway to his lips. For a moment, his composure slipped and a flicker of anger crossed his face. "You little eavesdropper," he hissed. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Beatrice shot back, leaning forward. "Then why did grandmother say she was going? To cut you out of the will. She said you didn't deserve a penny after what you'd done." The room erupted. Sir Henry slammed his fist on the table, making the candelabras rattle. "Beatrice, that's enough. You're tearing this family apart. Am I?" Beatrice's voice rose, trembling with emotion. "Or am I the only one willing to say what we're all thinking? Grandmother was murdered, and it was someone in this room. Maybe it was you, father, desperate for her money. Or you, mother, always so quiet, always watching. Or you, Uncle Vincent, with your secrets. Or even you, Dr. Marsh, with your charming smile and your convenient alibis." Dr. Marsh's smile faltered, and for the first time a shadow of unease crossed his face. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low, "that's a serious accusation. I was in my room all evening. I had no reason to harm Lady Eleanor. She was my friend." "Friend," Sir Henry scoffed, his voice thick with disdain. "You were awfully close to her, Marsh, always at her side, whispering in her ear. Some might say too close." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Henry, no, you can't mean I can, and I do," Sir Henry said, his eyes narrowing at Marsh. "Mother was a wealthy woman, and you're a guest here, not family. What exactly were your intentions?" Dr. Marsh's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "My intentions were honourable, Sir Henry. I cared for Lady Eleanor deeply, as a friend and confidant. If you're implying something else, I suggest you choose your words carefully." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Poirot watched the exchange with keen interest, his fingers steepled in front of him. Hastings, unable to contain himself, leaned toward Poirot again. "Good Lord, Poirot, they're at each other's throats. Do you think Marsh and Eleanor were well, you know?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Mon ami, you leap to conclusions like a grasshopper. Let us not assume, let us observe." Before the argument could escalate further, Clara let out a strangled cry and slumped forward, her head nearly hitting the table. Sir Henry was at her side in an instant, catching her as she swayed. "Clara, my God, what's wrong?" Her face was ashen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I can't breathe," she whispered, clutching at her chest. "It's too much, all of this." Beatrice rolled her eyes, unmoved. "Oh, please, Mother. Stop the theatrics. Beatrice, enough." Sir Henry roared, his face contorted. With anger, he turned to the butler, Mr. Grayson, who had appeared at the edge of the room. "Fetch some water, quickly." Grayson nodded and hurried away, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence. Dr. Marsh rose from his seat, his professional instincts kicking in. "Let me take a look at her," he said, moving toward Clara. "She may be having a panic attack, sir." Henry hesitated, his distrust of Marsh evident, but he stepped aside. Marsh knelt beside Clara, taking her pulse and speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. "Breathe slowly, Mrs. Blackwood, in and out. That's it." Clara's breathing steadied, but her eyes remained wide with fear, darting toward Poirot as if he were a predator circling his prey. Poirot noted her reaction, his mind cataloguing every detail. "Madame Blackwood," he said gently, "you are distressed. Perhaps there is something you wish to share, something that weighs heavily on your heart." Clara shook her head, her lips trembling. "No, nothing. I'm just overwhelmed." Poirot nodded, but his eyes conveyed that he was not convinced. He turned his attention to the rest of the table, his voice calm but commanding. "This dinner has revealed much, Mies, Amos, the threads of motive and opportunity are beginning to weave together, but we are not yet at the end of the tapestry. I urge you all to reflect on what you know, what you have seen. The truth will come to light, and I will be there to meet it." The meal concluded in strained silence, with the family and Marsh retreating to their rooms as soon as politeness allowed. Hastings lingered in the dining room, his brow furrowed. "Poirot," he said, "that was a disaster. They're all suspects." "Aren't they?" Clara's collapse, Beatrice's accusations, Sir Henry's temper, Vincent's secrets, Marsh's charm, it's a mess. Poirot chuckled softly, rising from his chair. "A mess, perhaps, but a revealing one. Each outburst, each glance, each tremorit is a piece of the puzzle. And now, Hastings, we must prepare for what comes next." "What comes next?" Hastings asked, following Poirot toward the door. Poirot paused, his hand on the doorknob, his eyes gleaming with determination. "The night, mon ami, is not yet over, and I suspect it will bring us closer to the truth." As the manor settled into an uneasy quiet, the darkness seemed to deepen, wrapping Blackwood Manor in a shroud of secrets. Poirot and Hastings retired to their rooms, but Poirot's mind was far from rest. He sat at a small writing desk, his notebook open before him, his pen moving with deliberate precision as he jotted down his observations. The dinner had been a crucible, and the reactions of the Blackwood family had revealed more than they intended. Clara's collapse, he noted, was not merely a reaction to the tension. Her fear was specific, directed at him, as if she sensed his scrutiny. Beatrice's outburst, while impulsive, had uncovered a critical piece of information. Vincent's argument with Eleanor, the word disgrace, suggested a scandal, one that Vincent was desperate to keep hidden. Sir Henry's accusation against Marsh, meanwhile, hinted at jealousy or suspicion, perhaps rooted in his own insecurities about the family's wealth. And Marsh himself, his calm demeanour was too polished, too practiced. A man with nothing to hide would not need such control. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He glanced at the clock, nearly midnight, and called. Out and Trez. Hastings entered, his face pale. "Poirot, you'd better come quickly. Something's happened." Poirot rose, his heart quickening. "What is it, mon ami?" "It's Vincent," Hastings said, his voice tight. "He's been poisoned." The two men hurried through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing on the polished wood floors. They reached Vincent's room, where a small crowd had gathered. Sir Henry, Beatrice, Dr. Marsh, and Mr. Grayson, the butler. Vincent was slumped in an armchair by the fireplace, his face grey, his breathing laboured. A glass of red wine lay shattered on the floor, its contents staining the rug. Dr. Marsh was already at Vincent's side, checking his pulse. "He's alive," Marsh said, his voice steady. "But he's ingested something toxic. We need to induce vomiting immediately." Monsieur Poirot muttered, his eyes scanning the room. He knelt beside the shattered glass, careful not to touch it, and sniffed the air. A faint, bitter odor lingered, distinct from the wine's bouquet. "Arsenic, perhaps," he said, his voice low. "Dr. Marsh, can you confirm?" Marsh nodded grimly. "It's possible. The symptoms: nausea, sweating, difficulty breathing. Consistent. I'll need to administer a remedy, but we must act quickly." Sir Henry, standing by the door, looked shaken. "Poisoned, in our own home. Who would do this?" Beatrice, her arms crossed, glared at her father. "Maybe the same person who killed grandmother. Or maybe Uncle Vincent knows too much, and someone wanted to shut him up." "Beatrice, hold your tongue," Sir Henry snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Poirot ignored the bickering, his attention fixed on Vincent. "Monsieur Blackwood," he said, leaning close, "can you speak? Do you know who gave you the wine?" Vincent's eyes fluttered open, his gaze unfocused. "The bottle," he rasped. "It was on the table. I poured it myself." Eyes narrowed. "The bottle, you say, and no one else touched it?" Vincent shook his head weakly, then winced, clutching his stomach. Marsh intervened, helping Vincent to his feet. "We need to get him to the bathroom, now." As Marsh and Sir Henry assisted Vincent, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Quickly, mon ami, fetch the bottle from the table. Do not touch it with your hands. Use a cloth." Hastings nodded and hurried to comply, returning moments later with a bottle of Bordeaux wrapped in a napkin. Poirot examined it closely, noting the label and the cork, which appeared undisturbed. "Curio," he murmured. "If the poison was not in the bottle, then it was in the glass itself. A targeted attack." Beatrice, who had been watching from the doorway, spoke up. "Targeted? You mean someone meant to kill Uncle Vincent specifically?" "Precisement," Poirot said, his voice grave. "And that, mademoiselle, suggests a motive beyond mere opportunity. Someone in this manner has a secret they are willing to kill to protect." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them like a fog. Vincent's groans echoed from the bathroom, where Marsh was tending to him, and the reality of a second crime in as many days sank in. Sir Henry ran a hand through his hair, his face haggard. "This is madness," he muttered. "Absolute madness." Poirot's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Nan, monsieur, it is not madness, it is calculation, and I, Hercule Poirot, will unravel it." The next hour was a flurry of activity. Marsh managed to stabilize Vincent, inducing vomiting to expel the poison. He administered a makeshift antidote, a mixture of water and charcoal from the Manor's medical supplies, declared that Vincent would likely survive, though he needed rest. The household, already on edge, was now in a state of near panic, with servants whispering in corners and the family retreating to their rooms under Poirot's watchful eye. Poirot and Hastings returned to the drawing-room, where the bottle and the shattered glass had been carefully preserved. Poirot examined the glass fragments, using a magnifying glass to inspect the residue. The poison was indeed in the glass, he confirmed, a fine powder likely sprinkled inside before the wine was poured. "The bottle, I suspect, is clean." Hastings frowned. "But how could someone poison the glass without being seen?" Vincent said he poured the wine himself. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. That is the question, mon ami. The glass was on the table, yes. And who had access to it? We must reconstruct the evening. Who was in the room when Vincent poured his wine? Hastings thought back. Well, Vincent was alone when I found him, but earlier, at dinner, everyone was in the dining room. The wine glasses were set out beforehand by the servants. Anyone could have tampered with one. Exactement, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But not just anyone. The poisoner knew which glass Vincent would take. This was no random act. We must speak to the servants, particularly Mr. Grayson. He oversees the table settings. They found Mr. Grayson in the kitchen, supervising the cleanup. The butler was a tall, dignified man in his 60s, with a face that betrayed little emotion. He bowed slightly as Poirot approached. Mr. Poirot, how may I assist you? Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said, his tone polite but firm. The wine glass used by Monsieur Vincent tonight can you tell me who prepared it? Grayson's brow furrowed slightly. The glasses are set out by the housemaids, sir, under my supervision. I ensure they are clean and properly arranged. Tonight, I personally checked the table before dinner and after dinner. Poirot pressed. When the family retired, did anyone linger in the dining room? Grayson hesitated, his eyes flickering with something Poirot couldn't quite place. Believe Mrs. Blackwood, Mrs. Clara Blackwood, returned briefly to retrieve her shawl. She was in the dining room for a moment before joining the others in the drawing room. Poirot's heart quickened, but his face remained impassive. Mercy. Monsieur Grayson, that is most helpful. One more question. The wine bottle on Vincent's table, where did it come from? The cellar, Sir Grayson replied. I selected it myself this afternoon. It was unopened when I placed it in the dining room. Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler with a wave of his hand. As Grayson departed, Hastings turned to Poirot, his eyes wide. Clara again. Poirot, she was near the study before the murder, and now she was in the dining room before Vincent was poisoned. It's got to be her, hasn't it? Poirot raised a finger, his expression cautionary. Not so fast, Hastings. The evidence points to Madame Clara, yes, but evidence can be manipulated. A clever mind might place her in these moments deliberately to cast suspicion. We must proceed with care. Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. This case is a tangle, Poirot. Every clue seems to point in a different direction. Poirot smiled, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. A tangle, yes, but one that will unravel, mon ami. The little grey cells, they are at work, and soon they will reveal the truth. Chapter 6. The mind map of motives. Hercule Poirot sat in the dimly lit library of Blackwood Manor, the weight of the investigation pressing upon him. The air was thick with the scent of old books and polished wood, a stark contrast to the chaos of secrets and lies that swirled around the inhabitants of the manor. The murder of Lady Eleanor Blackwood, stabbed in her locked study, had set off a cascade of suspicion, and the attempted poisoning of her brother Vincent the previous night had only deepened the mystery. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, piecing together the fragments of evidence, motives, and alibis. He had seen cases like this before, tangled webs of human greed, shame, and betrayal, but this one felt particularly intricate, as though the killer had anticipated his every move. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever loyal, sat across from him, his notebook open, scribbling observations. Poirot, he said, glancing up, this business with Vincent's poisoning got to be connected to Lady Eleanor's murder, don't you think? Someone's trying to silence him. Poirot raised a hand, his eyes half closed in thought. Patience, mon ami. The poisoning, it is a thread in the tapestry, but we must not pull it too quickly, lest the entire design unravels before we understand it. The motives, they are the key. We must map them, as I did in my early days, when the mind was my canvas and the clues my paint. Hastings frowned. A mind map? You mean that technique you used back in those early cases, the one where you'd jot down every possible reason someone might kill? Precisement, Poirot replied, his voice soft but firm. In my youth, I learned that to solve a crime, one must first understand the why. The how, the locked room, the secret passage, the poisoned windies are mechanics. But the why, Hastings, that is the heart of the matter. Come, let us construct this map together, and we shall see who in Blackwood Manor has the soul of a murderer. Poirot rose and crossed to a small writing desk, where he retrieved a sheet of paper and a fountain pen. He drew a circle in the centre and wrote Lady Eleanor's murder within it. From this he extended lines like the spokes of a wheel, each labelled with a suspect's name: Sir Henry Blackwood, Clara Blackwood, Beatrice Blackwood, Vincent Langley, Dr. Julian Marsh. A sixth line, labelled unknown, accounted for the possibility of an outsider, though Poirot's instincts told him the killer was within the manor's walls. Let us begin, Poirot said, tapping the paper. Each suspect, they have a motive, a reason to wish Lady Eleanor dead. We shall explore these motives, and in doing so, we shall uncover the truth. Sir Henry Blackwood. The burden of greed. Poirot's pen hovered over Sir Henry's name. Sir Henry, the son of Lady Eleanor, a man of pride, but also of debt. The Blackwood estate, it is grand, but its upkeep is a millstone around his neck. The servants whisper of unpaid bills, of creditors circling like vultures. Lady Eleanor, she was rewriting her will, and Sir Henry, he expected a large inheritance to save him from ruin. Hastings nodded. He's been on edge since we arrived, Poirot, snapping at the staff, arguing with Clara. If he knew his mother was about to cut him out to worse, leave the fortune to someone else, he might have acted in desperation. Desperation, yes, Poirot mused. But is it enough? Sir Henry, he is a man of temper, but also of calculation. To kill his mother in a locked room, to stage such a scene, it requires planning. And yet, his alibi is weak. He claims he was in the billiard room, alone, at the time of the murder. No one can confirm this. The greed, it is a powerful motive, but we must ask, did he have the cunning to execute such a crime? Poirot drew a subline from Sir Henry's name and wrote greed. Financial ruin, he added a note. Alibi unverified. Temperament volatile but calculated. Clara Blackwood, the shadow of jealousy next. Poirot turned to Clara, Sir Henry's wife. Madame Clara, he said, his voice low, she is a woman of nerves. Since the murder, she has been pale, trembling, fainting at the dinner table. But is it grief, Hastings, or guilt? The butler, Mr. Grayson, he told me something curious. On the night of the murder, he saw Clara near Lady Eleanor's study, shortly before the body was discovered. Hastings' eyes widened. Clara, but she said she was in her room, resting. Why would she lie? Perquoy, indeed, Poirot said, his moustache twitching. Clara, she is devoted to Sir Henry, perhaps too devoted. If she knew of his debts, of the threat to their status, she might have acted to protect him. Or perhaps there is another motive: jealousy. Dr. Julian Marsh, he is a charming man, and Lady Eleanor, she was fond of him. Too fond, perhaps, for Clara's liking. Jealousy, Hastings repeated. You think Clara suspected an affair between Eleanor and Marsh? It is possible, Poirot replied. Clara's anxiety, it is not only about the murder, it is personal. She watches Marsh with suspicion, and her fainting at dinner it came after Sir Henry accused Marsh of being too close to his mother. A woman jealous, she might kill to protect her marriage, her pride, or her husband's fortune. Poirot added, a subline for Clara. Jealousy, protecting marriage, fortune, he noted. Seen near study, alibi false, emotionally unstable. Beatrice Blackwood. The fire of revenge. Poirot's pen moved to Beatrice, the rebellious granddaughter. Mademoiselle Beatrice, he said, she is young, fiery, and resentful. Lady Eleanor, she controlled Beatrice's life, her choices, her future. Beatrice, she spoke of her grandmother's rules with bitterness. And then there is the ruby brooch, found in her room, as if to frame her. Hastings leaned forward. But Beatrice swore she was in the garden during the murder. And that brooch, it's too convenient, don't you think? Someone planted it to make her look guilty. Exactement, Poirot said. The brooch, it is a clumsy attempt to divert suspicion. But we must not dismiss Beatrice so quickly. She revealed at dinner that she overheard Lady Eleanor arguing with Vincent about a disgrace in his past. This suggests Beatrice knows more than she admits. Her motive, it could be revenge for the control, for the secrets, for a life she feels was stolen from her. Revenge, Hastings said, nodding. She's got the spirit for it, that's for sure. But would she kill her own grandmother? And how would she manage the locked room? The how we shall address later, Poirot said. For now, we focus on the why. Beatrice, she has the passion, the opportunity, and perhaps the knowledge to act, but her youth, it makes her reckless, not meticulous. The locked room, it requires precision. Still, we cannot rule her out. Poirot wrote under Beatrice, revenge, resentment of control. He added, brooch planted, garden alibi unverified, knowledge of family secrets, Vincent Langley. The weight of Poirot's gaze darkened as he considered Vincent, Lady Eleanor's secretive brother, Monsieur Vincent, he said. He is an enigma, evasive, guarded, and now a victim of poison. He claims someone tampered with his wine, but why? What does he know that makes him a target? Hastings tapped his notebook. Beatrice, said Eleanor, and Vincent argued about a disgrace. Could it be something from his past, a scandal he's hiding? Very likely, Poirot said. Vincent, he has lived in the shadow of his sister's wealth. He depends on her generosity, yet he is proud. If Lady Eleanor threatened to expose his disgrace or to cut him from her will, he might have struck first. And the poisoning, it could be a ploy to deflect suspicion, to make himself appear a victim. You think Vincent poisoned himself? Hastings asked, incredulous. It is not impossible, Poirot replied. Arsenic, it was in his glass, not the bottle. A small dose, enough to sicken but not to kill. A clever man, he might stage such a thing. But Vincent, he is cautious, not bold. To kill in a locked room, to plan so carefully, it is not his nature, perhaps. Poirot drew a subline for Vincent. Shame, hidden scandal, he noted. Poison self-inflicted, evasive. Financial dependence. Dr. Julian Marsh, the mask of ambition, Finally, Poirot turned to Dr. Julian Marsh, the charming guest. "Dr. Marsh," he said, "he is the outsider, yet he is too close to the family. His initials, they are on the ruby brooch, 2E, with Love, J. He admits to a past romance with Lady Eleanor, but he denies involvement in her death. Can we believe him?" Hastings shook his head. "There's something off about him, Poirot. He's too smooth, too quick with his answers. And Sir Henry's accusation that Marsh was after Eleanor's fortune, it's not hard to believe." Nan Poirot agreed. "Marsh, he is ambitious, a doctor, perhaps, but also a man of charm, of opportunity. If he loved Lady Eleanor, or pretended to, he might have sought her wealth, and if she discovered his true intentions, she might have become a threat. The brooch, it links him to her, yet he claims it was stolen. Convenient, Nan." Poirot wrote under Marsh. Ambition, wealth, control. He added, brooch connection, alibi unverified. Charming but deceptive. The unknown, a shadowy possibility. Paused, his pen hovering over the unknown line. And then there is the possibility of an outsider. The muddy footprint you found, Hastings, near the back entrance, suggests an intruder. But I believe it is a distraction, a red herring. The murder, it is too personal, too intimate. The killer knows the manor, the family, the secrets. Hastings sighed. "So you're ruling out an outsider entirely?" "Not entirely," Poirot said, "but the probability, it is low. The locked room, the coded letter, the family tensions, these point to someone within. Still, we keep the possibility open, for the mind must remain flexible." Poirot wrote, "Unknown intruder." He noted, "Footprint red herring, low probability." The butler's testimony with the mind map taking shape, Poirot decided to delve deeper into the household's dynamics. He summoned Mr. Grayson, the butler, whose earlier comment about Clara had piqued his interest. Grayson entered, his posture rigid, his face a mask of professionalism. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot began, "you have served the Blackwood family for many years. You see much, yet you speak little. Tell me, what did you observe on the night of Lady Eleanor's murder?" Grayson hesitated, then spoke. "I saw Mrs. Blackwood near the study, sir, around 9 o'clock. She seemed agitated, looking about as if she didn't want to be seen. I thought it odd, as she rarely visited Lady Eleanor's wing." "And you are certain of the time?" Poirot pressed. "Yes, sir," Grayson replied. "I was checking the clocks, as is my habit before retiring. It was precisely 9. The murder, I understand, happened shortly after." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And did you see anyone else near the study?" "No, sir," Grayson said. "But I heard raised voices earlier, around 8. Lady Eleanor and Mr. Vincent, I believe, in the drawing room. I couldn't make out the words, but it was heated." "Merci, Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, dismissing him. As the butler left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Clara, she lied about her whereabouts. And Vincent, his argument with Eleanor, it adds to his motive. The mind map, it grows clearer. Clara's denial." Poirot decided to confront Clara immediately. He found her in the morning room, embroidery in her lap, though her hands were idle. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Madame Blackwood," Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm, "you told me you were in your room on the night of Lady Eleanor's murder, resting. Yet the butler, he saw you near the study at 9 o'clock. Why did you lie?" Clara's needle slipped, pricking her finger. She gasped, dropping the embroidery. "I didn't lie," she stammered. "I was in my room. Grayson must be mistaken." "Nan, madame," Poirot said, his voice sharpening. "Grayson, he is precise. He saw you, agitated, near the study. If you were not involved in the murder, why were you there? What are you hiding?" Clara's eyes darted to the door, as if seeking escape. I went to speak to Eleanor," she admitted at last. "About Henry. He's in trouble, Monsieur Poirot. Debts, creditors. I begged her to help him, to include him in the will, but she refused. She said he needed to learn responsibility. I left her alive, I swear. And you did not tell me this. Why?" Poirot asked, leaning forward. "Because I was afraid," Clara whispered. "Afraid you'd think I killed her, but I didn't. I couldn't." Poirot studied her, noting the tremble in her hands, the desperation in her voice. "Very well, madame," he said. "But know this, the truth, it will come out. It always does." As Clara dissolved into tears, Poirot returned to the library, his mind racing. Clara's admission strengthened her motive, but her fears seemed genuine. Was she a killer or a pawn in someone else's game? The poisoned wine revisited Poirot's thoughts, turned to Vincent's poisoning, a puzzle within the puzzle. The arsenic, found only in Vincent's glass, suggested a targeted attack. But who had the opportunity? The wine had been served at dinner, with all suspects present. Poirot recalled the seating arrangement. Vincent at the head, Clara to his left, Sir Henry to his right, Beatrice across, and Marsh nearby. "Hastings," Poirot said, "fetch the footman who served the wine. We must know who handled Vincent." "Glass." The footman, a nervous young man named Thomas, confirmed that he poured the wine from a single bottle, shared by all. "I filled Mr. Vincent's glass last, sir," he said. "It was on the table, untouched, until I poured it. No one else handled it, not that I saw." "And the glasses?" Poirot asked. "They were clean before the meal." "Yes, sir," Thomas said. "I checked them myself. All spotless." Poirot dismissed Thomas, his mind turning. The poison, it was added after the wine was poured, but before Vincent drank. A sleight of hand, perhaps, during the chaos of dinner. Clara, she was closest to Vincent. But Sir Henry, Beatrice, Marsh, they all had opportunity. The mind. Map evolves back at the writing desk. Poirot updated the mind map. Under Clara, he added, admitted to begging Eleanor for Henry, lied about whereabouts. Under Vincent, he wrote, argument with Eleanor disgrace, poisoning targeted. For each suspect, he noted their proximity to Vincent at dinner, their opportunity to tamper with the glass. Hastings, Poirot said, the motives, they are clear, but the connections, they are not. The ruby brooch, the coded letter, the torn will, the secret passage, these are pieces of a larger picture. The killer, they are clever, weaving a web to confuse us. But the mind map, it will guide us to the truth. Hastings looked at the paper, now covered in Poirot's neat script. It's like a spider's web, Poirot. Every thread leads somewhere, but where's the center? The center, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming, is the final clue. The one piece that ties all others together. We are close, mon ami, but we must proceed with care. The killer, they watch us, and they will strike again if we falter. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot folded the mind map and tucked it into his pocket. The library grew silent, but his mind buzzed with possibilities. The motives were mapped, the suspects exposed, but the truth remained just out of reach. Tomorrow, he vowed, he would unravel the next thread in the tapestry of Blackwood Manor's secrets. Chapter 7. The The ruby brooch reappears the morning after the tense dinner at Blackwood Manor. The air was thick with suspicion. The family had barely spoken to one another, each retreating to their private corners of the sprawling estate, as if hoping distance could shield them from Poirot's piercing gaze. The detective, however, was far from idle. His little grey cells, as he so fondly called them, were humming with activity, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle that was Lady Eleanor Blackwood's murder. Poirot stood in the grand library, a cavernous room lined with oak shelves that groaned under the weight of centuries-old books. The faint scent of leather and dust hung in the air, mingling with the sharp temps of wood polish. Captain Hastings, ever his loyal companion, paced near the fireplace, his brow furrowed. "I say, Poirot," he began, "this business with the family is getting murkier by the hour. Everyone's pointing fingers, but we're no closer to the truth." Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie and gave Hastings a measured look. "Patience, mon ami. The truth, it is like a fine wine, it requires time to reveal its full character. We have many clues, but they must be arranged in the proper order. The mind, it must not rush." Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But that dinner last night, Beatrice accusing Vincent, Sir Henry glaring at Dr. Marsh, and Clara fainting like some damsel in a melodrama. It's a mess, yes, but a mess with meaning," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "Each outburst, each glance, each tremblet is a thread in the tapestry of this crime. And now we must follow a new thread that has appeared." Before Hastings could ask what he meant, there was a sharp knock at the library door. It swung open to reveal Mr. Grayson, the butler, his face pale and his usual composure slightly frayed. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said, bowing stiffly. "There's been a development. You're needed in Miss Beatrice's room." At once Poirot's moustache twitched with interest. "A development, you say? Terse interessant. Lead the way, Monsieur Grayson." The trio moved swiftly through the manor's labyrinthine corridors, their footsteps muffled by thick Persian rugs. Beatrice's room was on the second floor, tucked away in a quieter wing of the house. As they approached, the sound of raised voices spilled out into the hallway. Poirot's keen ears caught Beatrice's indignant tone and the softer, placating voice of a maid. They entered to find Beatrice standing in the centre of her room, her cheeks flushed with anger. Her dark hair was slightly dishevelled, and her hands were clenched into fists. A young maid, Molly, stood nearby, wringing her hands and looking close to tears. On the bed lay a small velvet box, its lid open to reveal a glittering ruby brooch, the very heirloom reported missing from Lady Eleanor's study. "What is the meaning of this?" Poirot asked, his voice calm but commanding attention. Beatrice whirled to face him, her eyes blazing. "They're trying to frame me, Monsieur Poirot. That's what this is. Molly claims she found this brooch under my bed while cleaning, but I've never seen it before in my life." Molly, trembling under the weight of Beatrice's accusation, stammered, "I swear, sir, I was just sweeping, and there it was, tucked under the bed frame. I didn't put it there." Poirot raised a hand. For silence, his gaze sweeping the room. The space was elegantly furnished, with a four-poster bed draped in green silk, a vanity cluttered with perfume bottles, and a large window overlooking the manor's gardens. The scene was one of ordered chaos, as if Beatrice's fiery personality had left its mark on every surface. But Poirot's attention was drawn to the brooch itself, gleaming like a drop of blood against the black velvet dot. He approached the bed and leaned closer, his gloved hands hovering over the brooch without touching it. The ruby was large, set in an intricate gold filigree that spoke of antique craftsmanship. Its facets caught the morning light, casting tiny red sparks across the bedspread. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he noticed something of faint engraving on the gold setting, barely visible without close inspection. "Mon ami," he said to Hastings, "fetch my magnifying glass from my case in the library, if you please." Hastings nodded and hurried out, leaving Poirot to study the scene. He turned to Beatrice, who was watching him with a mixture of defiance and fear. "Mademoiselle Beatrice, you say you have never seen this brooch before. Yet it is found in your room, under your bed. Tell me, where were you the night of your grandmother's murder?" Beatrice crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "I've told you already. I was in the garden, walking alone. I needed air, grandmothers. Rules were suffocating me. I didn't go near her study, and I certainly didn't steal her precious brooch." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you, Mademoiselle Molly," he said, turning to the maid. "You found this brooch while cleaning, yes? Tell me precisely how it came to your notice." Molly swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was sweeping under the bed, sir, like I do every morning. The broom caught on something, and when I looked, there was the box, half hidden in the dust. I opened it to see what it was, and, well, I recognized the brooch from Lady Eleanor's collection. I told Mr. Grayson right away." Poirot's gaze flicked to Grayson, who stood silently by the door. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, you brought this to my attention. Have you anything to add?" The butler shook his head. "Only that I thought it best to inform you immediately. Sir, the brooch is valuable, and its presence here is troubling." "Troubling, indeed," Poirot murmured. He straightened as Hastings returned, slightly out of breath, and handed him the magnifying glass. Poirot leaned over the brooch once more, peering through the lens. The engraving became clear. 2E, with love, J. He set the magnifying glass down and turned to Beatrice. "This brooch, it belonged to your grandmother, yes?" Beatrice nodded reluctantly. "It was one of her favorites. She wore it often, especially for important occasions. But I swear, I didn't take it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "The engraving, it suggests a gift, perhaps from someone close to Lady Eleanor. The initial J, it, is significant, Nan." Beatrice's eyes widened. "You think it's Dr. Marsh, don't you? His name is Julian. But why would he give her such a thing? And why would it end up in my room?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Grayson. "Monsieur, please summon Dr. Marsh to the library. I wish to speak with him at once." Grayson bowed and left, while Poirot instructed Molly to remain in the room to ensure the brooch was not disturbed. He gestured for Beatrice and Hastings to follow him back to the library, where he could think in peace. As they walked, Hastings leaned close and whispered, "Do you think Beatrice is lying, Poirot? She's got a temper, and she clearly resented her grandmother." Poirot shook his head. "It is too early to judge, Hastings. The brooch, it is a clue, but it is also a distraction. Someone placed it in Mademoiselle Beatrice's room, knowing it would cast suspicion upon her. We must ask ourselves, who benefits from such a deception?" In the library, Poirot settled into a high-backed chair, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Beatrice sat across from him, her defiance giving way to unease. Hastings stood by the window, watching the gravel drive for Dr. Marsh's arrival. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner at last. Dr. Julian Marsh entered, his usual charm tempered by a wary expression. He was a tall man, with sharp features and dark hair swept back from his forehead. His eyes flicked to Beatrice, then to Poirot as he took a seat. "You wished to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, his voice smooth but cautious. Poirot fixed him with a steady gaze. "Oui, Monsieur Marsh, a most curious discovery has been made. The ruby brooch, missing from Lady Eleanor's study, has been found in Mademoiselle Beatrice's room, and upon this brooch there is an engraving, too. E, with love, J your name. It begins with J, does it not?" Marsh's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered. "It does, but I assure you, I had nothing to do with the brooch's disappearance or its reappearance. I don't deny I knew Eleanor well, but I didn't give her that brooch." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but probing. "You were close to Lady Eleanor, yes. Close enough, perhaps, to exchange gifts of such intimacy." Marsh's jaw tightened. "Eleanor and I, we had a connection years ago, a romance, if you must know. It ended amicably, and I remained her friend. But I swear I didn't give her that brooch, and I had no reason to harm her." Beatrice, who had been silent, suddenly stood. "You're lying. You were always hovering around grandmother, charming her, probably after her money, and now you framed me to cover your tracks." "Enough, mademoiselle," Poirot said sharply, raising a hand. "Accusations without proof, they are like arrows shot in the dark, they hit nothing. Dr. Marsh, tell me, where were you when the brooch was stolen, the night of the murder?" Marsh met Poirot's gaze evenly. "In my room, as I've said. I retired early, around 9 o'clock, and didn't leave until morning. I have no alibi, but I also have no motive." Poirot nodded slowly, his mind racing. "Very well. You may go, Monsieur Marsh, but do not leave the manor. I may have more questions." As Marsh left, Beatrice turned to Poirot, her voice trembling. "You don't believe him, do you? He's hiding something." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Everyone in this house, mademoiselle, is hiding something. The question is, who hides the truth that matters most?" Over the next few hours, Poirot immersed himself in the mystery of the brooch. He returned to Beatrice's room, examining the spot where the velvet box had been found. The floor was polished wood, and the dust Molly had mentioned was minimal, suggesting the box had been placed recently. He noted the bed's position, the angle of the broom's reach, and the likelihood of the box being overlooked during previous cleanings. It was clear the brooch had been planted, but by whom, he questioned. Molly again, gently probing her story. The maid was earnest, her fear genuine, and Poirot concluded she was unlikely to be involved. Grayson, too, seemed above suspicion, his loyalty to the Blackwood family evident in his every word. Yet Poirot's instincts told him the butler might, no more than he let on, not as a culprit, but as a witness to the manor's secrets. By afternoon, Poirot had constructed a mental map of the brooch's journey. It had been taken from Eleanor's study, likely during or after the murder, and hidden in Beatrice's room to implicate her. The engraving pointed to Dr. Marsh, but Poirot suspected this was another layer of deception. Marsh's admission of a past romance was convenient, perhaps too convenient. The real question was why the brooch had been moved now. Days after the crime, Poirot decided to broaden his investigation, turning his attention to the other family members. He sought out Sir Henry Blackwood, who was in the billiard room, nursing. A glass of brandy despite the early hour. Sir Henry's face was haggard, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep or worry or both. Monsieur Poirot, he said, setting down his cue. Have you found my mother's killer yet? This house is a pressure cooker, and I'm not sure how much more we can take. Poirot tilted his head. The pressure, it reveals much, Monsieur Blackwood. Tell me, what do you know of the ruby brooch, the one belonging to your mother? Sir Henry frowned. That old thing. Mother loved it, wore it all the time. It's worth a fortune, but I don't know why anyone would steal it, only to leave it lying around. And you have no knowledge of how it came to be in your daughter's room? Poirot asked, watching him closely till Sir Henry's eyes widened. Beatrice? No, that's absurd. She's headstrong, but she's no thief, and certainly no murderer. Someone's trying to pin this on her, aren't they? Poirot did not answer directly. Your daughter, she resented your mother's control. Yes. And you, monsieur, you faced financial difficulties. The loss of your mother's fortune, it would be inconvenient. Sir Henry's face darkened. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with this, you're barking up the wrong tree. I loved my mother, and I'd never hurt her, no matter how desperate things got. Poirot nodded, filing away Sir Henry's reaction. He moved on to Clara, Sir Henry's wife, whom he found in the conservatory, tending to a tray of orchids. Clara was a delicate woman, her movements precise but nervous, as if she feared breaking something or being broken. Madame Blackwood, Poirot began, the ruby brooch. It has caused quite a stir. You have heard, no doubt, that it was found in your daughter's room. Clara's hand froze mid-air, a pair of pruning shears trembling in her grip. Yes, I heard. It's dreadful. Beatrice would never do such a thing. She's impulsive, but not cruel. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You seem certain, madame. Yet the brooch, it is a clue, and clues do not lie, only people do. Tell me, where were you when Lady Eleanor was killed? Clara's lips parted, but no sound came out for a moment. I was in my room, resting. I had a headache. Henry can vouch for me. He was there earlier and later. Poirot pressed. When the murder occurred, between 10 and midnight. Clara's eyes darted away. I was asleep. I don't know anything more. Poirot let the silence stretch, watching her fidget. The brooch, madame, it carries an engraving, to E with love. J. Does this mean anything to you? Clara shook her head quickly. No, nothing. I don't know who J is. Maybe it's old, from before my time here. Poirot thanked her and left, his mind churning. Clara's nervousness was palpable, but was it guilt or fear? He sought out Vincent, Eleanor's secretive brother, who was in the drawing room, reading a newspaper with apparent disinterest. Monsieur Vincent, Poirot said, taking a seat opposite him. The ruby brooch, it has resurfaced, and with it, new questions. You knew your sister well, who might have given her such a gift, marked with the initial J. Vincent lowered his newspaper, his eyes guarded. Eleanor had many admirers in her youth. The brooch could be from anyone. I don't recall AJ specifically. Poirot leaned forward. And yet, you seem to recall so little, monsieur. Your sister was rewriting her will, arguing with you about a disgrace in your past. Now her brooch appears in your niece's room. These are not coincidences, I think. Vincent's lips thinned. I don't know what you're implying, Poirot, but I had no part in Eleanor's death. As for the brooch, I suggest you ask Dr. Marsh. He's the one with the right initial. Poirot smiled faintly. Merci, monsieur. Your suggestion, it is noted. As evening fell, Poirot retreated to the library once more, his notebook opened before him. He sketched a diagram connecting names, motives, and clues. The brooch was central, its engraving a deliberate pointer to Dr. Marsh. But Poirot's instincts told him the truth lay deeper, hidden beneath layers of misdirection. The brooch was not just a clue, it was a weapon, wielded to shift blame and obscure the killer's identity. He summoned Hastings, who arrived, looking eager for answers. Well, Poirot, what's the verdict? Is Marsh our man, or is Beatrice in deeper trouble than we thought? Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. The verdict, Hastings, is that we are being played. The brooch, it was placed to implicate Mademoiselle Beatrice, but its engraving, it points too neatly to Monsieur Marsh, the killer. They are clever, but they underestimate Hercule Poirot. Tomorrow we dig deeper into the secrets of this family, and into the heart of the manor itself. Hastings grinned. You've got that look in your eye, Poirot. The one that says you're onto something. Poirot's moustache curved upward. Perhaps mon ami. Perhaps. The day had been long, and the mystery of the ruby brooch had only deepened the shadows over Blackwood Manor. But for Hercule Poirot, each shadow was a challenge, each clue a step closer to the truth. As the clock struck 9, he retired to his room, his mind alive with possibilities, ready to unravel the next thread in the tapestry of deceit. The following morning, Poirot rose early, determined to pursue the brooch's origins further. He began by revisiting the study where Lady Eleanor had been killed, hoping to find any overlooked detail that might connect to the brooch. The room was as he had left it, the air still heavy with the memory of violence. The spilled ink bottle, the torn paper, the ajar window all were pieces of the puzzle. But the brooch was the key that had shifted the game. He examined the desk where the brooch had last been seen. According to the staff, a small jewelry box, now empty, sat in one corner, its velvet lining marked by the brooch's weight. Poirot ran his fingers along the box's edges, checking for hidden compartments, but found none. He then turned to the safe, which he had opened earlier to find the coded letter. Could the brooch have been stored there, only to be taken during the murder? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. It was Mr. Grayson, his face ashen. Monsieur Poirot, there's something you should know. One of the footmen, Thomas, overheard a conversation last night between Sir Henry and Clara. It was heated. Poirot's interest piqued. Heated, you say? Tell me more. Grayson lowered his voice. Thomas was passing by the conservatory after dinner. He heard Sir Henry say something about ruin and no choice. Clara was crying, begging him to stay quiet. Thomas didn't catch everything, but he thought it sounded suspicious, given, well, everything. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Merci, Monsieur Grayson. This is most helpful. Please, keep this between us for now. As Grayson left, Poirot considered the implications. Sir Henry and Clara, under pressure, discussing ruin. Could it relate to the brooch, or to the larger motive of Eleanor's murder? He decided to confront Clara again, this time with more directness. He found her in the morning room, embroidering a cushion with mechanical precision. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes flicked up to meet his with a flash of fear. Madame Blackwood, Poirot began, we must speak plainly. The ruby brooch, found in your daughter's room, it is a plant, yes. Someone wishes to cast suspicion on Mademoiselle Beatrice. But I wonder, do you know who? Clara's needle paused mid-stitch. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. I've told you, Beatrice is innocent. Poirot leaned closer, his voice low and insistent. And yet, Madame, you are not. I have heard of a conversation between you and your husband about ruin and no choice. What ruin, Madame? And what choice? Clara's face drained of colour. You're mistaken. There was no such conversation. You're trying to trap me. Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. None, Madame. I am trying to find the truth. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear from Hercule Poirot. But if you hide something, it will come to light, and the consequences, they will be severe. Clara's hands dropped to her lap, the embroidery forgotten. Please, Monsieur Poirot, I don't know anything about the brooch or my mother-in-law. Death. I'm just trying to hold my family together. Poirot studied her for a long moment, then stood. Very well, Madame. But know this, the truth, it cannot be embroidered over. It will reveal itself in time. As he left the morning room, Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections. Clara's fear, Sir Henry's desperation, the brooch's engraving, defiance, Marsh's charm, Vincent's secret soul, were pieces of the same puzzle. But the picture was still incomplete, and Poirot knew the next clue would be crucial. He decided to re-examine the manor's layout, focusing on the areas where the brooch might have been hidden before being planted. He enlisted Hastings to help, and together they searched the guest rooms, the servants' quarters, and the common areas. In the library, Hastings found a loose floorboard near the fireplace, but it concealed only a dusty old book, not the brooch. Frustrated, Hastings turned to Poirot. This is like looking for a needle in a haystack, Poirot. The brooch was moved, we know that, but where was it before Beatrice's room? Poirot tapped his temple. The answer, Hastings, is not in the where, but in the why. Why move the brooch now? Why point to Beatrice? Why point to Marsh? The killer. They are playing a game, but they do not know that Hercule Poirot is a master of games. By late afternoon, Poirot had interviewed the remaining staff, hoping to uncover any sightings of the brooch or suspicious behaviour. The cook, Mrs. Hargreaves, mentioned seeing Clara near the second-floor landing the night of the murder, carrying a small box. When Poirot pressed her, she admitted it might have been a jewellery box, but she couldn't be sure in the dim light. This new detail sent Poirot back to Clara, but she was nowhere to be found. Sir Henry, when questioned, claimed she was resting in their room, but a quick check revealed it empty. Poirot's suspicions deepened. Was Clara avoiding him, or had something more sinister occurred? As dusk settled over Blackwood Manor, Poirot gathered the family in the drawing-room for an impromptu meeting. He stood before the fireplace, his small stature belied by the commanding presence he exuded. Sir Henry, Clara, who had reappeared, looking shaken, Beatrice, Vincent, and Dr. Marsh sat in a tense semicircle, their eyes fixed on him. Madame, et messieurs. Poirot began. The ruby brooch, it is more than a jewel. It is a message. A weapon, a lie. Someone in this room placed it in Mademoiselle Beatrice's room to cast suspicion upon her. Someone in this room knows why the initial J was engraved upon it. And someone in this room knows who killed Lady Eleanor Blackwood. The room erupted in protests, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. I do not accuse yet, but I warn you, the truth, it is close. The little grey cells, they are working, and they do not rest until the puzzle is complete. Tomorrow we will uncover more. For now, I bid you good night. As the family dispersed, their faces a mix of fear and defiance, Poirot turned to Hastings. Mon ami, the brooch. It is the key to the killer's mind. But it is not the only key. We must find the others, and soon. The night passed uneasily, with Poirot lying awake, his mind tracing the contours of the case. The ruby brooch, with its glittering surface and hidden engraving, was a perfect metaphor for Blackwood Manor, itself beautiful, complex, and full of secrets. But Hercule Poirot was determined to uncover them all, no matter how deeply they were buried. Chapter 8. The Torn Papers. Meaning Hercule Poirot sat in the dim light of Blackwood Manor's library, the heavy silence of the old house pressing against the walls. The room was a cavern of books, their spines worn and dusty, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and polished wood. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the table where Poirot had spread out his findings. The torn piece of paper from Lady Eleanor's study, its edges ragged, the word trust scrawled in her elegant hand. Beside it lay the spilled ink bottle, its contents now dried into a dark, irregular stain on a blotting pad. The ruby brooch, still missing at this point, haunted his thoughts, but it was the paper that held his focus now. He adjusted his pince-nez, his small, precise hands smoothing the fragment as if it might yield its secrets through touch alone. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, paced near the fireplace, his boots clicking softly on the polished floor. "I say, Poirot," he began, his voice tinged with impatience. "This torn paper business is all very mysterious, but what does it mean? Trust could refer to anything, a person, a fund, a promise, and that ink spill. Surely it's just an accident, not some grand clue." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Mon ami, you see the surface, but you do not observe. The ink spill, it is no accident. It is deliberate, a veil to conceal. And this word, trust, it is the key to the lock we must open. We must reconstruct what was written, what was destroyed, and why. The truth, Hastings, it hides in the details." Hastings stopped pacing, his brow furrowing. "Reconstruct, but it's just a scrap. Half the words are gone." "How can you possibly patience, my friend?" Poirot interrupted, raising a hand. The mind of Hercule Poirot does not falter before a puzzle. "We shall begin with what we have, and from there we shall build. Fetch me the magnifying glass from my case, s'il vous plaît." Hastings complied, retrieving the small, silver-handled magnifying glass from Poirot's leather valise. The detective took it with a nod, leaning closer to the torn paper. The fragment was no larger than a calling card, its edges uneven, as if torn in haste. The ink was black, the handwriting unmistakably Lady Eleanor's, but the tear had severed the sentence mid. Poirot traced the letters with his eyes, murmuring softly to himself in French, a habit that always signalled his mind was at work. "Trust," he repeated, his voice low. "It is a noun, perhaps, or a verb. I trust or the trust. But the context, it is missing. And yet, the tear itself, it tells a story. The paper was not torn by accident. Tit was deliberate, meant to obscure. But why leave this fragment? Why not destroy it entirely?" Hastings leaned over the table, squinting at the paper. Perhaps the killer was interrupted. They didn't have time to finish the job. Poirot shook his head. Nan, the killer, they are meticulous. The locked room, the spilled ink, the missing brooch, these are not the acts of one who is careless. This fragment was left for a purpose. It is either a mistake or a misdirection, and Hercule Poirot does not believe in mistakes. He turned his attention to the ink bottle, its heavy glass base still resting on the blotting pad. The spill had spread unevenly, pooling in some areas, soaking into the paper in others. Poirot lifted the bottle, examining its underside. A faint smear of ink clung to the edge, as if it had been tipped deliberately. He set it down and picked up the blotting pad, holding it to the light. The ink had seeped through, leaving faint impressions of letters, ghostly and reversed. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice sharp with excitement, "you see, the blotting pad, it is a mirror of the past. It has captured what was written before the spill. We may yet recover the lost words." Hastings peered over his shoulder, his skepticism evident. "It's just a mess, Poirot. How can you read anything in that?" "With method, my friend, with method." Poirot took a pencil and a fresh sheet of paper, carefully tracing the faint impressions on the blotting pad. The letters were fragmented, but with painstaking care he began to piece them together. After several minutes, he sat back, his eyes gleaming. "Voila, it is not complete, but it is enough. The paper, it was a draft of a will. And the word trust, it refers to a family trust, one that Lady Eleanor intended to alter, a will." Hastings exclaimed, "Good heavens, that changes everything. If she was changing her will, someone stood to lose a fortune. That's motive, Poirot, precisement," Poirot agreed. "But we must be cautious. The will, it is only part of the puzzle. The ink spill was meant to hide a second document, something the killer did not wish us to see. And this torn paper may be a plant designed to lead us astray. We must verify, we must question, we must observe." The library door creaked open, and Mr. Grayson, the butler, entered, carrying a silver tray with a pot of tea and 2 cups. His face was impassive, but Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hands as he set the tray down. "Your tea, sir," Grayson said, his voice steady. "Will there be anything else?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying the man. Grayson was in his late 50s, his posture rigid, his grey hair neatly combed. He had served the Blackwood family for decades, a fixture of the manor, yet Poirot sensed an undercurrent of unease. "Mercy, Mr. Grayson," Poirot said, his tone polite but probing. "Tell me, you were in the hall near Lady Eleanor's study on the night of her death, were you not?" Grayson's eyes flickered, but he nodded. "Yes, sir. I was attending to the lamps, as I do every evening." "And you saw nothing unusual? No one near the study door?" The butler hesitated, his fingers tightening on the tray. "No, sir, it was quiet. I heard nothing until the scream, when Miss Beatrice found her grandmother." Poirot's moustache twitched again, a sign he had caught something. "And yet, Mr. Grayson, you were seen near the study by one of the maids. She claims you were there. Before the scream, not after. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Grayson's face paled, but he recovered quickly. "The maid must be mistaken, sir. I was in the hall, but not near the study. My duties take me throughout the house." "Bean," Poirot said, waving a hand dismissively. "That will be all for now. But do not leave the manor, Mr. Grayson. I may have more questions." The butler bowed and exited, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone. Hastings frowned, pouring himself a cup of tea. "He's hiding something, Poirot. Did you see how nervous he was? Perhaps he's in on it." "Perhaps," Poirot mused, tapping his fingers on the table. "But we must not leap to conclusions. The maid's testimony, it is second-hand. We must speak with her directly. And we must find this second document, the one hidden by the ink spill. It is the key to the torn paper's meaning. The next morning, Poirot and Hastings sought out the maid, a young woman named Lily, who worked in the kitchen. She was nervous, twisting her apron in her hands as they questioned her in the servants' quarters. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "But I saw Mr. Grayson near the study. I swear it. It was just—" Before the scream, he was standing by the door, looking. Odd, like he was listening. "Listening," Poirot repeated, his eyes sharp. "And what did you hear, mademoiselle? Any sounds from the study?" Lily shook her head. "No, sir, it was quiet. But I didn't stay long. I had to get back to the kitchen. Mrs. Harrow, the cook, she'd have my head if I dawdled." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Merci, Lily. You have been most helpful. Do not speak of this to anyone, comprise." As they left the servants' quarters, Hastings was brimming with theories. Poirot, if Grayson was at the door, he could have heard something or done something. Maybe he's the killer, or he's covering for someone. What about Sir Henry? He's desperate for money, or Clarucci's been acting strange. Poirot held up a hand, silencing him. "Calm yourself, Hastings. We have a thread, but it is not yet a rope. Grayson's presence at the door, it is suspicious, but it does not make him a murderer. We must find the second document, and we must speak with the family again to test their stories against this new information." They returned to the library, where Poirot resumed his examination of the blotting pad. He spent hours tracing the faint impressions, piecing together fragments of words. By midday, he had reconstructed a partial sentence: "Revoke the trust." In favor of the rest was illegible, lost to the ink spill. But it was enough to confirm his suspicion. Lady Eleanor had been altering a family trust, likely the source of the fortune that Sir Henry so desperately needed. "This trust," Poirot said, leaning back in his chair, "it is the heart of the motive. Someone in this house knew of Eleanor's plan to change it, and they killed her to prevent it. But the torn paper, it is too convenient. Why leave it? Why not burn it? The killer wishes us to believe the will is the motive, but I suspect it is a distraction." His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. It was Mr. Grayson, his face ashen. "Monsieur Poirot, there's something you should know. One of the footmen, Thomas, overheard a conversation last night between Sir Henry and Clara. It was heated." Poirot's interest piqued. "Heated, you say? Tell me more." Grayson lowered his voice. "Thomas was passing by the conservatory after dinner. He heard Sir Henry say something about ruin and no choice. Clara was crying, begging him to stay quiet. Thomas didn't catch everything, but he thought it sounded suspicious, given, well, everything." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Merci, Monsieur Grayson. This is most helpful. Please, keep this between us for now." As Grayson left, Poirot considered the implications. Sir Henry and Clara, under pressure, discussing ruin. Could it relate to the brooch, or to the larger motive of Eleanor's murder? He decided to confront Clara again, this time with more directness. He found her in the morning room, embroidering a cushion with mechanical precision. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes flicked up to meet his with a flash of fear. "Madame Blackwood," Poirot began, "we must speak plainly. The ruby brooch, found in your daughter's room, it is a plant, yes. Someone wishes to cast suspicion on Mademoiselle Beatrice. But I wonder, do you know who?" Clara's needle paused mid-stitch. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. I've told you, Beatrice is innocent. Poirot leaned closer, his voice low and insistent. And yet, madame, you are not. I have heard of a conversation between you and your husband about ruin and no choice. What ruin, madame? And what choice? Clara's face drained of colour. You're mistaken. There was no such conversation. You're trying to trap me. Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. None, madame. I am trying to find the truth. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear from Hercule Poirot. But if you hide something, it will come to light, and the consequences, they will be severe. Clara's hands dropped to her lap, the embroidery forgotten. Please, Monsieur Poirot, I don't know anything about the brooch or my mother-in-law. Death. I'm just trying to hold my family together. Poirot studied her for a long moment, then stood. Very well, madame. But know this, the truth, it cannot be embroidered over. It will reveal itself in time. As he left the morning room, Poirot's mind was a whirl of connections. Clara's fear, Sir Henry's desperation, the brooch's engraving, defiance, Marsh's charm, Vincent's secret soul, were pieces of the same puzzle. But the picture was still incomplete, and Poirot knew the next clue would be crucial. He decided to re-examine the manor's layout, focusing on the areas where the brooch might have been hidden before being planted. He enlisted Hastings to help, and together they searched the guest rooms, the servants' quarters, and the common areas. In the library, Hastings found a loose floorboard near the fireplace, but it concealed only a dusty old book, not the brooch. Frustrated, Hastings turned to Poirot. This is like looking for a needle in a haystack, Poirot. The brooch was moved, we know that, but where was it before Beatrice's room? Poirot tapped his temple. The answer, Hastings, is not in the where, but in the why. Why move the brooch now? Why point to Beatrice? Why point to Marsh? The killer. They are playing a game, but they do not know that Hercule Poirot is a master of games. By late afternoon, Poirot had interviewed the remaining staff, hoping to uncover any sightings of the brooch or suspicious behaviour. The cook, Mrs. Hargreaves, mentioned seeing Clara near the second-floor landing the night of the murder, carrying a small box. When Poirot pressed her, she admitted it might have been a jewellery box, but she couldn't be sure in the dim light. This new detail sent Poirot back to Clara, but she was nowhere to be found. Sir Henry, when questioned, claimed she was resting in their room, but a quick check revealed it empty. Poirot's suspicions deepened. Was Clara avoiding him, or had something more sinister occurred? As dusk settled over Blackwood Manor, Poirot gathered the family in the drawing-room for an impromptu meeting. He stood before the fireplace, his small stature belied by the commanding presence he exuded. Sir Henry, Clara, who had reappeared, looking shaken, Beatrice, Vincent, and Dr. Marsh sat in a tense semicircle, their eyes fixed on him. Madame, et messieurs, Poirot began, the ruby brooch, it is more than a jewel, it is a message. A weapon, a lie. Someone in this room placed it in Mademoiselle Beatrice's room to cast suspicion upon her. Someone in this room knows why the initial J was engraved upon it. And someone in this room knows who killed Lady Eleanor Blackwood. The room erupted in protests, but Poirot raised a hand for silence. I do not accuse yet, but I warn you, the truth, it is close. The little grey cells, they are working, and they do not rest until the puzzle is complete. Tomorrow we will uncover more. For now, I bid you good night. As the family dispersed, their faces a mix of fear and defiance, Poirot turned to Hastings. Mon ami, the the brooch. It is the key to the killer's mind. But it is not the only key. We must find the others, and soon. The night passed uneasily, with Poirot lying awake, his mind tracing the contours of the case. The ruby brooch, with its glittering surface and hidden engraving, was a perfect metaphor for Blackwood Manor, itself beautiful, complex, and full of secrets. But Hercule Poirot was determined to uncover them all, no matter how deeply they were buried. Chapter 9. A hidden passage. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackwood Manor, casting long shadows across the oak-panelled dining room where the household gathered for breakfast. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and the clink of porcelain cups seemed to echo the tension that had gripped the manor since Lady Eleanor's murder. Hercule Poirot, seated at the head of the table, observed the assembled company with his characteristic precision, his sharp eyes darting from one face to another. Captain Hastings, beside him, stirred his tea absently, his brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of the tangled web of clues they had uncovered. The discovery of the ruby brooch in Beatrice's room the previous evening had sent ripples of suspicion through the household. Beatrice, pale and defiant, sat across from her parents, Sir Henry and Clara, her eyes fixed on her untouched plate. Sir Henry, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, muttered something about the family's honour, while Clara, ever composed, sipped her tea with an air of detachment that Poirot found intriguing. Vincent, Lady Eleanor's secretive brother, slouched in his chair, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. Dr. Julian Marsh, the charming guest with a questionable past, maintained his usual air of nonchalance, though Poirot noted a flicker of unease in his gaze. "Mies Amos," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "we find ourselves at a crossroads in this most perplexing affair. The murder of Lady Eleanor Blackwood, committed in a room locked from within, presents a puzzle that demands the full attention of the little grey cells. Yet I am confident that the solution lies not in the impossible, but in the overlooked." Hastings leaned forward, eager to contribute. "Poirot, what about the brooch? It was found in Beatrice's room, after all. Doesn't that point to her involvement?" Poirot raised a hand, his moustache twitching slightly. "Patience, mon cher Hastings. The brooch, it is a clue, oui, but not necessarily one that condemns. Mademoiselle Beatrice. Evidence, it can be placed, manipulated, to lead us astray. We must look beyond the obvious." Beatrice's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "I told you, I didn't take the brooch. I was in the garden when grandmother was killed. Someone's trying to frame me." Sir Henry slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware rattle. "Enough, Beatrice. This is no time for your theatrics. If you're innocent, then who did it? Who would dare sully our family's name?" Clara placed a calming hand on her husband's arm. "Henry, please, let Monsieur Poirot do his work. He'll find the truth." Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging Clara's words, though his gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in her composure, he thought, that did not quite align with the grief one might expect from a daughter-in-law who had just lost her benefactor. But he said nothing, choosing instead to steer the conversation elsewhere. "Tell me, Monsieur Vincent," Poirot said, turning to the older man. "You have been most reticent about your activities on the night of the murder. Where were you when Lady Eleanor met her tragic end?" Vincent shifted uncomfortably, his fingers pausing in their restless dance. "I was in my room, reading. I heard nothing, saw nothing. I've told you this already, Monsieur Poirot. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone mild but his eyes piercing. And yet, I find it curious that no one can confirm your whereabouts. A man of your experience, shall we say, might have reasons to keep secrets. Vincent's jaw tightened, but he offered no reply. Dr. Marsh, sensing the tension, interjected with a disarming smile. Come now, Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't suspect poor Vincent of anything so sinister. He's hardly the type to wield a letter opener. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The type, Monsieur Marsh, is not always what it seems. But let us not dwell on suspicions alone. I propose a change of scene. Captain Hastings, would you accompany me on a walk through the manor? There are corners of this house that have yet to reveal their secrets. Hastings, relieved to escape the stifling atmosphere of the dining room, nodded eagerly. Of course, Poirot, lead the way. As the two men left the table, Poirot cast a final glance at the assembled company, noting the subtle shifts in their expressions: Clara's fleeting look of relief, Sir Henry's scowl, Beatrice's clenched fists, Vincent's guarded silence, and Marsh's calculated ease. The truth, he knew, was buried beneath layers of deception, but he was determined to unearth it. The corridors of Blackwood Manor were a labyrinth of polished wood and faded tapestries, each turn revealing glimpses of the family's storied past. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow Poirot and Hastings as they made their way toward the west wing, where Lady Eleanor's study was located. The locked room mystery had consumed Poirot's thoughts since the moment he had seen the crime scene, and he was convinced that the answer lay not in some fantastical explanation, but in a detail they had overlooked. Poirot, Hastings said, as they approached the study door, I've been thinking about that footprint we found near the back entrance. You dismissed it as a red herring, but what if it wasn't? What if someone from outside the manor, Hastings? Poirot interrupted gently. You are like the hound who chases every scent. No, the footprint, it is too convenient, too obvious. A true criminal does not leave such a calling card, unless it serves a purpose. No, the answer is here, within these walls. They entered the study, now cordoned off by the local police, though Poirot had secured permission to examine it further. The room was much as they had left it, the heavy desk littered with papers, the spilled ink bottle, the torn scrap of paper bearing the word trust, and the armchair where Lady Eleanor's body had been found, slumped over as if in mid-thought. The single window, ajar but too small for entry, mocked their efforts to solve the puzzle. Poirot paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning every surface. The locked room, he murmured. It is not a miracle, but a deception. The door was locked, the window impassable, and yet the killer entered and exited without leaving a trace. Or so it seems. Hastings, ever practical, began tapping the walls, half expecting to find a hidden panel. Perhaps there's a secret door, Poirot. These old houses are full of them. I read a story once. Poirot chuckled softly. Your imagination, Hastings. It is a delight, but you are not entirely wrong. Let us consider the architecture of this manor. A house such as this, built in the time of intrigue and rebellion, might indeed conceal passages known only to a few. Encouraged by words, Hastings redoubled his efforts, running his hands along the bookshelves that lined one wall. The shelves were packed with leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked with age, and a faint, musty smell permeated the air. As Hastings pressed against a particularly worn copy of the Canterbury Tales, he felt a slight give, followed by a soft click. To his astonishment, A section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a narrow cobweb-draped passage. "Poirot," Hastings exclaimed, stepping back. "Look at this, a secret passage." Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Bravo, Hastings. Your persistence has borne fruit. Let us see where this passage leads." The two men stepped cautiously into the passage, their footsteps muffled by a thick layer of dust. The air was stale, and the walls, rough-hewn stone, seemed to close in around them. Poirot produced a small flashlight from his pocket, its beam cutting through the darkness. The passage sloped downward, then turned sharply to the right, its path winding through the manor's foundations. "This must be how the killer got in and out," Hastings said, his voice echoing faintly. "They could have slipped into the study, killed Lady Eleanor, and then escaped without anyone noticing." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone cautious, "but we must not assume too much. A passage such as this, it is a tool, but it does not tell us who wielded it. Let us proceed." The passage ended at another hidden door, this one opening into the manor's library, a grand room filled with towering shelves and a massive fireplace. The door was concealed behind a panel painted to blend seamlessly with the wall, its edges barely discernible. Poirot pushed it open, and they stepped into the library, blinking in the sudden light. "The library," Hastings said, looking around. "This is just down the hall from the study. The killer could have been in and out in minutes." Poirot nodded, his mind already racing. "We and the library. It is a place where one might linger without arousing suspicion. A clever choice, if one wishes to remain unseen." He knelt to examine the floor near the hidden door, his fingers brushing against the polished wood. "Regard us, Hastings. The dust from the passage, it has been disturbed. There are footprints, fresh ones, leading into the library." Hastings crouched beside him, squinting at the faint marks. "They're small, Poirot. Could they belong to a woman?" Poirot's expression was unreadable. "Possibly, but we must be precise. Let us compare these prints to the shoes of the household." They returned to the study, where Poirot had earlier requested that the police preserve any evidence, including the shoes of all residents and guests. Among the items collected was a pair of Clara's delicate leather pumps, their soles worn, but distinct. Poirot placed one of the shoes beside the footprints in the library, his eyes narrowing as he studied the patterns. "A match," he said softly. "The size, the wear, the shapes, they are identical." Hastings's jaw dropped. "Clara, but why would she? She's been so calm, so composed. Could she really be the killer?" Poirot rose, brushing dust from his trousers. "Do not be so quick to judge, mon ami. Evidence, it can be manipulated, as I have said. The footprints, they point to Madame Clara, but they do not tell us why they are here. Was she the killer, or was she merely curious, exploring the manor's secrets? We must dig deeper." Hastings, still reeling from the discovery, followed Poirot back to the library, where they examined the hidden door more closely. The mechanism was simple but ingenious, operated by a concealed lever disguised as a book. Poirot traced the edges of the panel, noting faint scratches that suggested recent use. "This passage," he said, "it is not a new discovery. Someone in this household knew of its existence, perhaps for years. Lady Eleanor, she was a woman of secrets. It is possible she used this passage herself, to move unseen or to hide something of value, like the coded letter we found in the safe." Hastings suggested. "Precisement," Poirot said. "The letter, the brooch, the torn paper roll, are pieces of a larger puzzle. And now, this passage, it connects the study to the library, but also to the motives of those within this house. We must consider who had the opportunity and who had the knowledge. They spent the next hour exploring the library, searching for additional clues. Hastings, ever thorough, checked behind every painting and under every rug, while Poirot focused on the desk near the fireplace, where a stack of old letters caught his attention. Most were mundane correspondence about estate matters, but one, tucked beneath the others, bore Lady Eleanor's handwriting. Poirot unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the elegant script. "Listen, Hastings," he said, reading aloud. "My dearest Vincent, I fear our family's legacy is at risk. There are those who would betray us for their own gain. I have taken steps to protect what is ours, but I need your counsel. Meet me in the library tomorrow at midnight." Hastings frowned. That sounds like Eleanor suspected something. But why the library? And why Vincent? Poirot folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. The library, it is a place of secrets, as we have seen. And Vincent, he is a man who knows more than he admits. This letter, it suggests Lady Eleanor was planning to confront someone, or perhaps to reveal something. Her death, it may have been an attempt to silence her. As they prepared to leave the library, Poirot paused, his gaze settling on a small bronze statue of a horse on the mantelpiece. Something about its position seemed off, as if it had been moved recently. He lifted it, revealing a faint outline in the dust where it had once stood. Beneath the statue was a tiny key, its surface tarnished but intact. A key, Hastings said, his excitement returning. Could it open the safe in the study, or something else? Poirot turned the key over in his hand, his mind racing. This, Hastings, is another piece of the puzzle. But to what lock it belongs, we do not yet know. Come, we must return to the others. I wish to observe their reactions when we mention the passage. They made their way back to the drawing room, where the household had gathered after breakfast. The atmosphere was no less tense, with Sir Henry pacing near the fireplace, and Beatrice arguing quietly with her mother. Vincent sat alone, staring out the window, while Dr. Marsh lounged in an armchair, a book open in his lap. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Mesdames et messieurs, I have news. Captain Hastings and I have discovered a secret passage connecting Lady Eleanor's study to the library. It is, I believe, the key to solving the mystery of the locked room." A collective gasp rose from the group. Sir Henry stopped pacing, his face pale. "A passage? In my own house? Preposterous!" Clara's teacup clattered against its saucer, though she quickly regained her composure. A passage? How extraordinary! Did Eleanor know about it? Beatrice's eyes widened. "That's how the killer got in. It wasn't me, I swear." Vincent said nothing, but his fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. Dr. Marsh closed his book with a snap, his smile gone. "A secret passage? That's quite a find, Monsieur Poirot. Does it tell us who the killer is?" Poirot's gaze swept over them, noting every reaction. "Not yet, Monsieur Marsh, but it brings us closer. The passage, it was used recently, and footprints were found. Footprints that match the shoes of someone in this room." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Clara's face remained impassive, but her hands trembled slightly. Sir Henry blustered, demanding to see the passage himself. Beatrice looked relieved, as if the discovery vindicated her. Vincent's silence was deafening, and Marsh's eyes narrowed. Calculating, "We will inspect the passage together," Poirot said, But first, I must ask each of you to account for your movements in the library over the past few days. The truth, it will reveal itself, but only if we are honest. As the group began to murmur, offering half-hearted alibis and accusations, Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. The discovery of the passage had shifted the dynamics of the case, but it had also raised new questions. Who had known about the passage? Who had used it, and why? And what did the tiny key unlock? The answers, Poirot knew, were within his grasp, but they would require patience, precision, and the relentless pursuit of truth. For now, he would watch, listen, and let his little grey cells work their magic. The inspection of the secret passage was a chaotic affair, with Sir Henry insisting on leading the way, only to recoil at the sight of cobwebs. Clara followed her, expression unreadable, while Beatrice clung to her father's arm, her earlier defiance replaced by nervous curiosity. Vincent trailed behind, his face a mask of indifference, and Dr. Marsh brought up the rear. His casual demeanour at odds with the gravity of the moment, Poirot and Hastings guided them through the passage, pointing out the footprints and the hidden door in the library. The group's reactions were telling. Sir Henry's bluster masked a genuine shock, suggesting he had been unaware of the passage's existence. Clara's calm was almost too perfect, as if she had anticipated the discovery. Beatrice's chatter about old ghost stories felt forced, a distraction from her fear. Vincent's silence grew heavier, and Marsh's questions about the passage's construction were probing. Almost professional back in the drawing room, Poirot addressed the group once more. The passage, it changes everything, and yet it changes nothing. The killer, they are still among us, hiding behind lies and half-truths. But I, Hercule Poirot, will not rest until the truth is revealed. As the household dispersed, each lost in their own thoughts, Poirot pulled Hastings aside. "Mon ami, we are close, but we must be cautious. The killer, they know we are closing in. The next move, it will be theirs, and we must be ready." Hastings nodded, his mind still reeling from the day's discoveries. "What about the key?" "Poirot, what does it open?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "That, Hastings, is the question. And when we find the answer, I believe we will find the final piece of this puzzle." The day wore on, with Poirot retreating to his room to study the letter and the key, while Hastings kept watch over the household, noting their interactions. Clara spent much of the afternoon in the garden, her solitude interrupted only by a brief, heated conversation with Vincent. Sir Henry locked himself in his study, ostensibly to review estate papers, but Hastings suspected he was drowning his worries in brandy. Beatrice wandered the halls, her restlessness palpable, and Dr. Marsh lingered in the library, flipping through books with a distracted air. By evening, the manor was cloaked in an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant toll of the clock tower. Poirot emerged from his room, his expression one of quiet determination. "Hastings," he said, "tomorrow we will confront the household again, but tonight we must be vigilant. The killer, they are desperate, and desperation breeds mistakes." As they retired for the night, the weight of the case pressed heavily on Hastings's mind. The secret passage, the footprints, the key, the letteral, were threads in a tapestry that Poirot was slowly unravelling. But the final pattern, the twist that would solve it all, remained just out of reach. For now, they could only wait and hope that the next clue would bring them closer to the truth. Chapter 10. The Poisoned Wine, Cluth, the air in Blackwood Manor hung heavy with suspicion as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the oak-panelled dining room. Hercule Poirot sat at the head of the table, his sharp eyes darting from one face to another, observing the subtle twitches and fleeting glances of the assembled household. The events of the past few days, Lady Eleanor's murder, the lock-trim puzzle, the ruby brooch, and now the poisoning of Vincent Blackwood, had woven a tapestry of deceit that Poirot was determined to unravel. The poisoned wine incident, in particular, gnawed at his mind, a fresh clue that promised to illuminate the killer's identity, if only he could decipher its meaning. Captain Hastings, seated to Poirot's right, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I say, Poirot," he whispered, leaning closer, "this business with Vincent's wine, it's dashed peculiar, isn't it? First Eleanor, now her brother. Someone's got a vendetta against the Blackwoods, mark my words." Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign of his amusement at Hastings' penchant for dramatic conclusions. "Mon ami," he replied softly, "a vendetta, perhaps, but not against the Blackwoods as a whole. Nan, this is precise, calculated. The poison in Monsieur Vincent's glass was no accident. It was a message, a warning, or perhaps a silencing. We must understand the why before we chase the who." The dining room was quieter than usual, the clink of cutlery and the murmur of conversation subdued. Sir Henry Blackwood, his face pale and drawn, sat opposite his wife, Clara, whose hands trembled as she lifted her wine-glass. Beatrice, their daughter, stared at her plate, her expression a mixture of defiance and fear. Vincent, still weak from his brush with death, sat at the far end of the table. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the room. Dr. Julian Marsh, the charming but increasingly enigmatic guest, maintained his usual composure, though Poirot noted a slight tightening of his jaw when Vincent's gaze lingered on him. The butler, Mr. Grayson, moved silently around the table, refilling glasses with a practiced grace that belied the tension in the air. Poirot's mind was a whirl of details, each clue a thread in the intricate web he was constructing. The poisoned wine incident had occurred the previous evening, shortly after the heated dinner where accusations had flown like daggers. Vincent had taken a sip of his claret, only to collapse moments later, clutching his throat and gasping for air. Dr. Marsh, quick to act, had recognized the symptoms of arsenic poisoning and administered an antidote from his medical kit, saving Vincent's life. The household had been thrown into chaos, with everyone pointing fingers and denying involvement. Now, as Poirot sat among them, he knew the truth lay in the details of that near-fatal glass of wine. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the muted chatter. All eyes turned to him, some wary, others curious. "Last night we witnessed a most alarming event, the attempted murder of Monsieur Vincent. This is no isolated act, but a piece of the puzzle that began with the death of Lady Eleanor. I, Hercule Poirot, assure you that the truth will be revealed, for no criminal can outwit the little grey cells." A nervous ripple passed through the room. Clara's glass clinked against her plate, and Sir Henry cleared his throat loudly. Vincent's lips curled into a faint, sardonic smile, but he said nothing. Poirot continued, his tone measured but commanding. "The poison, arsenic, was found in Monsieur Vincent's glass, but not in the bottle from which it was poured. This tells us the attack was deliberate, targeted. Someone in this room, or someone with access to this room, placed the poison in that glass. I ask you now, who had the opportunity and who had the motive?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Beatrice was the first to break the silence, her voice sharp. "Why are you looking at us like we're all guilty? Maybe it was one of the servants or an outsider. You keep saying the answers in the manner, but what if you're wrong, Mr. Poirot?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "Mademoiselle Beatrice, I am never wrong, not when I trust the evidence of my own observations." The poison was placed in the glass after it was poured, during the brief moment when the table was unattended. The servants, they were in the kitchen, preparing the next course. An outsider, Nan, the timing is too precise, the knowledge of Monsieur Vincent's habits too intimate. The answer, as I have said, lies within these walls. Vincent leaned forward, his voice hoarse but steady. "If you're so sure, Poirot, why not name the culprit now? Or are you just fishing, hoping one of us will slip up?" Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was racing. Vincent's challenge was not unexpected. The man was cunning, perhaps more so than anyone else in the room. Poirot had already begun to suspect that Vincent knew more than he let on, perhaps even about Lady Eleanor's murder. The poisoning, Poirot reasoned, was not an attempt to kill Vincent outright, but to silence him, to prevent him from revealing a secret that threatened the killer. "Let us examine the facts," Poirot said, raising a hand to quell further interruptions. The wine was poured by Mr. Grayson, the butler, from a bottle that has been tested and found free of poison. The glass was placed before Monsieur Vincent, and yet, within moments, it contained arsenic. Who approached the table during that time? Who had the opportunity to tamper with the glass? All eyes turned to Mr. Grayson, who stood near the sideboard, his face a mask of professional neutrality. The butler stepped forward, bowing slightly. "If I may, sir, I poured the wine and placed the glass before Mr. Vincent myself. I then returned to the kitchen to oversee the dessert course. I saw no one near the table, but I cannot account for every moment." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to the others. And yet someone was near. Let us recall the sequence of events. Dinner was served, and the conversation grew heated. "Mademoiselle Beatrice, you left the table briefly to fetch a shawl. Madame Clara, you excused yourself to check on a headache. Monsieur Henry, you stepped out to take a telephone call. Dr. Marsh, you remained at the table, but you were distracted, were you not, by a question from Monsieur Vincent? Only Monsieur Vincent himself remained seated throughout, and yet he is the victim. Curious, Nan." Clara's face flushed, and she gripped her napkin tightly. "I was only gone for a moment, Mr. Poirot. I didn't go near Vincent's glass, sir." Henry's voice was gruff. "This is absurd. Are you accusing my wife, or me?" "I was on the telephone with my solicitor, as Grayson can confirm." Dr. Marsh raised a hand, his tone calm but firm. "Mr. Poirot, I understand your need to question us, but I was speaking with Vincent about a medical matter. I had no reason to harm him or anyone." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the faint tremor in Marsh's voice. The man was smooth, perhaps too smooth, and Poirot had not forgotten the ruby brooch with its telltale engraving. But for now, he turned his attention back to Vincent, who was watching the exchange with a predatory intensity. "Monsieur Vincent," Poirot said, his voice softening, "you are a man of secrets, are you not? Last night, before you drank the poisoned wine, you spoke of a disgrace in the family, a matter you claimed to know intimately. Perhaps you would care to share this with us now, to shed light on why someone wished to silence you." Vincent's smile faded, replaced by a wary expression. He glanced around the table as if weighing his options, then leaned back in his chair. You're a clever one, Poirot. All right, I'll give you something. I was blackmailing someone in this house, not for money, mind you, but for leverage. I know things Eleanor trusted me with, and someone didn't want those secrets coming out. That's all I'll say for now. You want more, you'll have to figure it out yourself. A gasp escaped Beatrice, and Clara's face went pale. Sir Henry slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising. Blackmail. You're admitting to blackmail, and you expect us to sit here and listen to this nonsense. Poirot, this man's the real criminal. Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but authoritative. Silence, Monsieur Henry. Monsieur Vincent's confession is a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole. The blackmail, it explains the motive for the poisoning, but it does not tell us who. We must look deeper, to the heart of the matter. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Hastings, unable to contain himself, whispered, "Good Lord Poirot, blackmail. This is getting murkier by the minute. Do you think Vincent's telling the truth?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. Truth, mon ami, is like a diamond hard to find, but unmistakable once uncovered. Monsieur Vincent speaks the truth, but only part of it. He knows who he was blackmailing, and he knows why. The poison was a warning, a desperate act to keep him silent. But why now? Why after Lady Eleanor's death? Poirot's mind turned to the clues he had already gathered. The locked study, the torn paper with the word trust, the ruby brooch, the secret passage, and now the poisoned wine. Each was a thread, and the blackmail was the knot that tied them together. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting his little grey cells work, piecing together the connections. The dinner concluded in strained silence, and the household dispersed, each member retreating to their rooms with a mix of fear and suspicion. Poirot, however, remained in the dining room, his fingers steepled as he stared at Vincent's empty glass, which had been carefully preserved for analysis. Hastings lingered nearby, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Poirot," he said, "you've got that look, the one you get when you're onto something. What is it? What's the key to this poisoned wine business?" Poirot opened his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. "The key, Hastings, is timing. The poison was placed in the glass during a moment of distraction, when the table was unattended, but it was not a random act. The killer knew Monsieur Vincent would drink, and they knew he would survive, for the dose was small, not enough to kill, but enough to frighten. This was no murder attempt, but a calculated move to silence a man who knows too much." Hastings frowned, scratching his head. But who, Poirot? Clara was gone, Beatrice too, and Henry was on the phone. Marsh was right there, but you said he was distracted. Could it have been Grayson, or someone else entirely? Poirot rose from his chair, his movements precise and deliberate. "Patience, mon ami. The answer lies not only in who was absent, but in who had the knowledge. Arsenic is not a common poison. It requires access, preparation, and the blackmailer is the heart of it. Monsieur Vincent knows a secret tied to Lady Eleanor's death, and the killer fears its exposure. We must speak to Vincent again, alone, and we must do so quickly, before the killer strikes again." The two men made their way to Vincent's room, the manor's corridors dimly lit by flickering gas lamps. Vincent was sitting by the window, a glass of water in his hand, his face pale but composed. He looked up as Poirot and Hastings entered, his eyes narrowing. "Back so soon, Poirot," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "I told you, I've said all I'm going to say. Unless you've got proof, you're just chasing shadows. Poirot's expression was unreadable, but his voice was firm. Monsieur Vincent, you are a man who plays a dangerous game. You admit to blackmail, yet you refuse to name your target. You were poisoned, yet you sit here unafraid. I ask you now, plainly, what do you know about Lady Eleanor's death? What secret is worth your silence, and perhaps your life? Vincent's gaze flickered, and for a moment Poirot thought he might crack. But then the man leaned back, his smile returning. You're good, Poirot, I'll give you that. But I'm not ready to talk, not yet. Let's just say the secret I know is bigger than you think, and it's not just about Eleanor. It's about this family, this manor, everything. If I talk, it all comes crashing down. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind racing. Vincent's words confirmed his suspicions. The blackmail was the key, the linchpin that connected Eleanor's murder to the poisoning. But Vincent was too clever, too stubborn, to reveal more without pressure. Poirot decided to change tactics. Very well, Monsieur Vincent, he said, his tone lightening. You choose to play the game of silence. But know this, the killer will not stop. They have struck once, and they will strike again. If you wish to survive, you will need Hercule Poirot as your ally, not your adversary. Think on that. With that, Poirot turned and left the room, Hastings trailing behind. As they walked back to their quarters, Hastings shook his head in frustration. Blast it, Poirot. He's hiding something big, isn't he? Why won't he talk? And what's this? About the whole family. Do you think he's protecting someone? Poirot paused in the corridor, his eyes distant. Protecting, perhaps, or controlling. Vincent is a man who thrives on power, on knowing more than others. But he underestimates the killer, and that is his mistake. The secret he holds is the motive for both Eleanor's murder and his own poisoning. We must find it, Hastings, before the killer does. The night passed uneventfully, but Poirot slept little, his mind consumed by the puzzle. The next morning he requested a private meeting with Dr. Marsh, whose role in the drama was still unclear. Marsh met Poirot in the library, his demeanor polite but guarded. Mr. Poirot, Marsh began, I hope you're not still suspecting me of this poisoning nonsense. I saved Vincent's life, after all. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Indeed, Doctor, your quick thinking was most fortunate. But I am curious, arsenic is a poison not easily obtained. As a medical man, you would know where to find it, Nan. And your initials, they appear on the ruby brooch, a most intriguing coincidence. Marsh's face darkened, but he maintained his composure. I've told you, the brooch was a gift to Eleanor years ago. As for arsenic, yes, I know of it, but so does anyone with a basic knowledge of chemistry. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving Marsh's face. Perhaps, Doctor, but the tree, it has many branches, and I must examine them all. Tell me, what was your conversation with Monsieur Vincent about last night, before the poisoning? He seemed most interested in your medical expertise. Marsh hesitated, then shrugged. He asked about antidotes, of all things. Said he was worried about accidental poisoning, given the manor's old plumbing. I thought it odd, but I humoured him. Poirot's interest piqued. Vincent had anticipated the poisoning, or at least suspected it. This was a new piece of the puzzle, one that suggested Vincent was not as unsuspecting as he appeared. Poirot thanked Marsh and dismissed him, his mind already turning to the next step. Over the next few hours, Poirot conducted a meticulous examination of the dining room, focusing on the sideboard where the wine had been poured. He found no trace of arsenic, but he did discover a faint smudge of powder on the underside of the table, near Vincent's seat. A quick test confirmed it was arsenic residue, likely spilled during the act of poisoning. The smudge was small, almost invisible, but to Poirot it was a beacon. "Hastings," he said, showing his friend the discovery, "this is the work of a careful hand, but not careful enough." The poison was added to the glass here, at the table, during the distraction of the argument. The killer was bold, but they left this trace, and it will be their undoing. Hastings stared at the smudge, his eyes wide. "Good heavens, Poirot. You're saying the killer was right there, in plain sight. But who? Clara, Beatrice, Marsh, or someone else?" Poirot's smile was faint but confident. "The who will reveal itself, mon ami, when we understand the why. The arsenic, the blackmail, the secret passage, the torn paper, all are connected. The killer believes they have outsmarted Hercule Poirot, but they are mistaken. The little grey cells, they never fail." As the day wore on, Poirot continued his investigation, interviewing the staff and re-examining the clues. The manor seemed to pulse with secrets, each room and corridor hiding a piece of the truth. He spoke again with Clara, whose nervous demeanour grew more pronounced, and with Beatrice, whose defiance masked a deep fear. Sir Henry, meanwhile, seemed increasingly desperate, his financial troubles weighing heavily on him by evening. Poirot had formed a clearer picture of the case, though the final piece eluded him. The poisoned wine was not just a clue, but a turning point, a moment where the killer had revealed their hand. Vincent's blackmail was the key, and Poirot knew he needed to press the man further, to break through his stubborn silence. That night, Poirot and Hastings sat by the fire in the drawing-room, the manor quiet around them. Hastings, ever loyal, looked to his friend with a mix of admiration and exasperation. "Poirot, I've seen you solve some rum cases, but this one's a proper tangle. The poisoned wine, the blackmail, the locked room. How do you make sense of it all?" Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed. "It is a tangle, Hastings, but every knot can be undone with patience and precision. The poisoned wine tells us the killer is desperate, willing to risk exposure to silence Vincent. The blackmail tells us there is a secret worth killing for. And the murder of Lady Eleanor, it tells us the stakes are higher than we imagined. We are close, mon ami, very close." Hastings nodded, though his expression remained dubious. "I hope you're right, Poirot, but I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something big." Poirot's eyes opened, a spark of determination in their depths. "We are missing nothing, Hastings. The truth is there, waiting to be seen. Tomorrow we will find it, and the killer will have nowhere to hide." As the fire crackled and the shadows danced, Poirot's mind continued to work, piecing together the final clues. The poisoned wine was the thread that would unravel the mystery, and Hercule Poirot was determined to follow it to its end.